like, look.
200 views.
You did your makeup. Okay, it's 9 a.m. Let's go ahead and get the recording going.
On YouTube.
Is it already recording?
Yes. Hold on one second.
Okay, it is 9 a.m. and I will call this meeting of the Board of Investments to order. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. David.
Please rise. Put your hand over your heart. Repeat after me. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Linda, can we start with announcements?
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting and in person, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Knox?
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. David Green?
Here.
Mr. Santos?
Here.
Mr. Jason Green?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Rue?
Present.
Mr. Jones?
Present.
Mrs. Jones?
Present.
Mr. Kelly?
Present.
And Chair Sanchez?
I am here.
Staff participating in the meeting include the following: CIO John Grable, CEO Santos Cramen, Deputy CIO Jude Perez, Deputy CEO Louis Lugo, Interim CFO Ted Granger, Richard Bendel, Christine Sun from the Internal Audit. Investment staff includes Scott Drazel, Kwok Wen, Cheryl Liu, Dale Johnson, James Rice, Mike Romero, Catherine Tan, Pushpam James, Cindy Rivera, Mel Chow, and Inga Tadevosian. Consultants and presenters include the Makita Investment Group and Stepstone. Trustees, please use your raise your hand option to be placed in the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mic until you're ready to speak. And now we may proceed with the agenda.
Okay, and we have one request for AB 2449. Or do we?
We do not.
We do not. Okay. So moving on to the approval of the minutes. Do I have?
I'll move approval. I'll second.
Okay, thank you.
1 second. Mr. Green. Seconded by, was it Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Okay. So Mr. Green, Jason Green,
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez,
Aye.
Mr. Santos. We have to do more. Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. David Green.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, do we have any requests for public comment?
We do not have any requests for public comment.
All right, moving on to the executive update. We will begin with Mr. Grable, our Chief Investment Officer's report.
Good morning, Madam Chair, trustees. So we have a busy meeting, a full agenda today, so I will try to keep my comments at a high level. So if we could start on slide 4, please. Thank you, Cindy. The data on these tables and charts are through the end of October. So this is, in many ways near current. And as the tables show that major markets have struggled since the beginning of our fiscal year on July 1st. With that said, month to date, November is very strong. Which is, always a positive. I'll always take up markets over down markets. But according to these tables, the last 3 months, broad global equity markets were down 10%. U.S. bond markets were down close to 5%. And, last month I said on this slide, it's hard to make money when stocks and bonds are down. Which is a truism. However, it's a truism because, public equity and investment grade fixed income are the major drivers of an institutional portfolio like ours. And this is where I will undercut my comment in that I think I lacked some nuance in terms of that statement. And from a performance reporting perspective, from a mark-to-market perspective from the portfolio, it is an absolute that it's hard to make money when when markets are down, because our portfolio on a mark-to-market basis is lower than it was prior to that. However, these drawdowns typically aren't realized, and they may only be temporary, such that markets can go down, but they can, if you're still holding the investment, you can benefit from the upside. And that the future may be very bright for some investments that have been temporarily marked down. And we can use kind of an age-old example of Amazon. Amazon went from $5 to less than 30 cents during the dot-com bubble, and back over $140, whatever it is today. So the right thing may have been to say, you know what, at 30 cents, I'm getting out. The future isn't bright. For those that held on 50x later, I think that they're, probably, happy. However, not everything is Amazon. You can ask the shareholders of, pets.com or Webvan, more currently kind of WeWork. It's, maybe for every Amazon, there's a dozen others. So in some sense, it's a function of your sample set. In addition to, what may be temporary marks and things that in a certain time period, we have to mark down because of accounting conventions and rules, we're also continually deploying capital for new investments. And Mr. Santos, the board chair, were asking kind of questions towards that end during the equity committee meeting about what is our dry powder. The concept of dry powder is predicated on the notion that we're continuously making new investments. So some of our best investments, may be made when others are fearful. And, once again, we saw that during the discussion during the equity committee. And I believe that one of the charts that Mr. Fernandez showed was the returns for private equity vintage commitments during the global financial crisis. That those were, when it was hardest, where people were fearful, there were some of the best returns. So maybe a hallmark of our investment belief in diversification is that it's designed to work in multiple time periods and economic environments. That hopefully we always have something that is working or not working less well. That's the beauty of our portfolio. So some of our best investments may be made when others are fearful. But this kind of best investment concept may understate our opportunity set. And we can take, investment grade fixed income, for example. As rates rise, our portfolio will have higher current income. And with higher current income, we get closer to the fund's 7% threshold with every coupon payment, every month, quarter, whatever the frequency of that is. And in many ways, that risk mitigates the fund, trying to get that 7% as we get more in current coupon. So in addition to having the potential for some of our best investments, we have maybe a broader opportunity set for a whole category of better investments. And in some sense, maybe a lot of betters is, as good, if not better, than a best. And somewhere in that, I've kind of contradicted myself with betters, bests. And but I think that we have the potential for lots of betters, maybe some bests, but I think that the end is not here because markets were down in the short-term time periods, as we can see here on slide 4. And maybe I'll finish the slide with something that I excel at, which is a unremarkable statement, which is that we should neither overreact to these temporal shifts nor underreact to structural changes. And in practice, identifying kind of the differences is our major challenge. That's really difficult. And And maybe I'll finish the circle that I started with. As a mature pension, this gets further complicated. So the work that we do is really difficult. And this is a really simple slide, and I complicated it, but I think that the mission we have and the mandate we have in front of us in challenging markets, is really hard. But I think that the board does a really good job at trying to elevate the discussion that we have in order to meet our mission to members. So if we can turn to slide 9. This shows the performance results for the period for September, which was the end of our first fiscal quarter. It's hard to believe it's the end of the first fiscal quarter. The fund was down 1.9% net for the month. The market value, our NAV, was $72.6 billion. Cash is at a very comfortable $916 million. You can see in the bottom middle of the slide. And turning to the next slide, this slide shows the results for the first fiscal quarter. The fund was down, and on the top of the page, we can see 1.4% net for the quarter. And I'll highlight on the column next to fiscal year to date, the 1-year number. Our 1-year return is 8.7%. That's fantastic. That's above the 7%. However, we underperformed our benchmark return of 10.5%. I never like missing a benchmark. That's not good from my perspective. In looking at the returns in that benchmark, and this was also evident in the equity committee this morning, where the team from Stepstone talked about how the last year was a tough year for private equity. It's evident in our benchmark. Over 100% of our underperformance was in private equity. So the rest of the portfolio, did well. Private equity has a really tough benchmark. It is not necessarily good in kind of short-term periods where we have a spread to a public benchmark. It's not investable. True, we did benefit from that in other time periods. So I guess we have the good and the bad together. And what I will add is that as part of the strategic asset allocation exercise, the board reviews benchmarks and the appropriateness of each benchmark. So that will be at some point early next year as part of our strategic asset allocation exercise. And to further punctuate the private equity benchmark, it may not be good, but it may be better than any other benchmark that may exist for it, because it's a tough asset category in shorter time periods. The benchmark. The bottom of the slide shows the OPEB trust. The net asset value there is $3.1 billion. Is down 3.3% for the month and quarter, and the volatility and performance or differences once again between OPEB and the pension will compress a bit as the illiquid portfolio is further implemented. And in consideration of the agenda, Madam Chair, I'll pause for questions.
Okay. Any questions? Yep.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Graybull. Talking about benchmarks, I remember years ago when I questioned the consultant about the benchmark, the response was, it's just noise. So how is the real estate portfolio doing in comparison to the benchmark?
And Madam Chair and Mr. Santos, I don't have that information in front of me right now. We can provide that maybe later in the agenda, or I believe it's next month. We have the quarterly performance book where there'll be lots of detail about real estate, other asset categories at the asset composite level as well as the manager level for real estate. So that may be a better answer than or an informed answer.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll look forward to that next month. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. We will move on to our member spotlight.
Great,
Mr.
thank you.
Lugo.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Sanchez. Good morning, trustees. If we can go to LACERA All-Stars. I don't know who's running.
They're gonna bring it up right now.
Okay. While Linda's bringing that up, and again, as a reminder, LACERA All-Stars really highlight and represent the commitment among our staff as it relates to supporting not only our members, but also one another, and they're solicited from our staff. So these individuals are highlighted. Linda, do we have the All-Stars highlighted?
Yeah. Oh wait, all stars. We don't have the all stars. We do the member spotlight. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'll verbally highlight the All-Stars. How about that? Because one of them is within our investment division. But we want to highlight Cynthia Martinez, John Kim, and if I can read my handwriting, Lisa Garcia and Veronica Martinez. So we certainly want to highlight those All-Stars at LACERA and appreciate their work. Next, our member spotlight. And again, I know this was an item that was championed by Trustee Green and Trustee Santos for several months. And it's as I hear Mr. Grable talk about some of the criticality and the decisions that the investment team makes, it's always great to see why those decisions are critical and to have kind of a visualization and front and center on our why. So today we're going to be recognizing Mr. Tyrone Brown. Mr. Brown has served the County of Los Angeles for 43 years. He currently serves as a park supervisor for the County Parks and Recreation Department. He started his career with the county as a lifeguard, overseeing the county's shorelines and several beaches. Some of the things that Mr. Brown highlights is he enjoys obviously swimming, but he's looking forward to continuing his engagement within the community and really volunteering his services. He also is a avid concert goer, which JJ appreciated because JJ also is an avid concert goer. And then one of the things he highlights within his description is the fact that his daughter has followed in his footsteps and is also currently a county lifeguard. So with that, if you can join me in congratulating Mr. Brown on his retirement and ensuring that he serves a healthy and well-deserving retirement as he transitions later this month. So with that.
Wow. Thank you. That is amazing. And it is such a difficult bar to be a county lifeguard. So impressive.
Absolutely.
All right.
And with that, I'll also keep my comments short in terms of the CEO updates, just a few updates. We're continuing to onboard and orient our new trustees. Over the last month, staff has been busy. The divisions have been busy preparing orientation materials for the elected trustees. And I think most of them are close to complete. So I know there's been a lot of meetings scheduled over the last 4 weeks. So appreciate staff efforts and obviously our newly elected trustees for availing themselves to be oriented. And look forward to having them start January. Also, we continue to make progress in our recruitment efforts. We have about 12 to 13 active recruitments. We expect in the next month to hopefully close out the next about 6 or 7 recruitments, which will help with our bandwidth. So really looking forward to kind of closing out some of those critical recruitments over the next month, and we'll report on that in the December BOI and BOR meetings.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, is your question now or after?
It's just a comment. I wanted to just expand that as far as I know, all the new trustees are women. So that's a wonderful thing.
Oh, thank you. Very excited about that.
And then lastly, we had our first LACERA management offsite in 4 years. Due to COVID, we've postponed the LACERA management offsite. And our focus there was really on the BOR strategic plan, but obviously as one LACERA, we did have investments and a lot of the PIOs were a part of that meeting. A lot of the strategic objectives within the strategic plan for the BOR is organizational. So whether it's innovation through technology or some of the efforts that we want to make around our training and development and investing in people. So we look forward to investments, continued engagement, and making sure that we roadmap and accomplish our desired state over the next 5 years. So with that, Chair Sanchez, I stand for any questions.
Okay, and I assume that in this coming year, we will start to see a unified strategic plan for the entire organization, which both boards opine on and all staff opines on as one body?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, moving on. We have our non-consent items. Do we have any request to pull any of those? Otherwise, I will take a motion. Oh, these are all non-consent,
Yeah.
sorry. No consent items today. All right, moving on to the first non-consent item, the actuarial consulting and actual audit services request for proposal.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Trustees. We are requesting the Board approve the search criteria for an actuarial consulting and actuarial auditing services RFP. This RFP involves the joint efforts of the Executive Office, the Investment Office, FASD, Internal Audit, Legal, and RHC. The Investment Office would like to extend its sincere appreciation to everyone involved for their time and cooperation with developing this RFP. For this presentation, I will provide a high-level summary of the proposed scope of services and then hand it over to Tina Sun from Internal Audit to cover the minimum qualifications and evaluation criteria. Ted Gradinger from FASD is also here with us to answer any questions. Next slide, please. This RFP will positively contribute to LACERA's mission to produce, protect, and provide the promised benefits. It would also align with LACERA's strategic plan for fiscal durability by exercising care and managing resources to ensure we receive high-quality work for the retirement plan and OPEB program. The last time we issued an actuarial services RFP was in 2017. This search is for a 5-year contract with 2 additional 1-year term options, which aligns with LACERA's procurement policy. LACERA would select one firm to perform actuarial consulting services and a separate firm to perform actuarial auditing services for the retirement plan and OPEB program. LACERA considers the actuarial independence of firms bidding for different consulting and auditing roles. As such, LACERA's current actuarial consultant and retiree healthcare consultant, as well as LA County's actuarial consultant, are limited in their participation in this RFP. Next slide, please.
Question?
Yes.
Madam Chair, thank you. Why is that, the 4th bullet? I'm not clear about why that is. Why are they restricted? On the previous slide.
In terms of the actuarial independence,
But expand on that, why?
I think maybe,
Have they had the job previously and they're not able to, it's not clear to me, that bullet.
Yes, there was a legal analysis done by Steve Rice and even our outside fiduciary counsel that if they're currently providing services to LACERA and they're auditing their own work, could be perceived as lack of independence.
Okay, but if they're currently doing one, they're not doing the other. So in this RFP, can they bid on the other?
yes. So like for Milliman and Siegel, they could bid for the actuarial consulting role, but not for the actuarial auditing role.
Okay, so they can't bid on the role for which they currently provide.
Yes,
Okay,
but
fine.
for LA County, Chiron can't bid for either the actuarial consulting or actuarial
Why is
auditing role.
that? Because that's a contractor for LA County, not for LACERA.
Is there a conflict between the role that LA County has? Oh, here comes Mr. Rice.
The conflicts are important to me because they limit the potential pool of providers who can bid, and the pool over time is becoming fewer and fewer as we see consolidation in this industry.
Chiron is effectively performing the same work for the county as client. And so for them to also do the work for LACERA would eliminate independence for the county and independence for LACERA in doing this important work. I also can elaborate on the Siegel and Milliman conflicts if there are any further questions about that.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, just for clarification, I understand. So Milliman, for example, they're auditing actuary, correct? But
Milliman is consultant.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but they can go through the RFP process for the other role, right?
Correct.
And my one specific question was that time limits. I thought we had talked about at one point, like we don't want to continue to. It's not favorable optics to see someone that has a 5-year contract with a 2-year extension rolling over into a possible another one. Is that still the case? Am I remembering that incorrectly?
Well, let me clarify the conflicts, because I think there may be some confusion here. So Milliman who is the and has been for many years, the consulting actuary could not bid to be auditing actuary because they would in effect be auditing their own work because there's historical analysis involved there.
Oh, yeah.
Siegel, on the other hand, who is our retiree healthcare consultant, could not be auditing actuary for the OPEB trust because they would be auditing their own trend numbers and other healthcare data. So those are the conflicts. I want to make sure we're clear on that. So Milliman can continue to apply for the consulting role. Siegel can apply for consulting roles, but not the OPEB auditing role.
Right.
In that open, fair RFP process, there's no restriction on the time limit with them rolling in. If they get the RFP bid, they potentially could extend another 7 years.
Yes, and Milliman's been with us for 20 years. So yes.
That was my specific. Thank you.
So once,
If I may,
Yeah, who we have Mr. Santos and
I'll put
Mr.
myself in the
Kelly.
queue.
Okay, Mr. Santos.
yeah, and to complicate matters, just to follow up to Mr. Green's point, is that there's not that many. The pool is very limited. The candidate pool is very limited, and that's why we have. Although Milliman does a tremendous job, no question about it. But in years past, I have seen that we're just limited to the amount of potential bidders that will diversify us away from Milliman, for example, or Siegel. Is that right, Mr.?
Yes, there's no question that enforcement of these conflicts reduces the pool in both the consulting and auditing categories. But this is very important. It's a critical role, and the independence of the actuary is essential. We had a long discussion about this in 2017 at the time of the last RFP for auditing services, and I provided a legal opinion. We also had Fiduciary Counsel provide legal opinion at that point, and those legal opinions remain valid, and they're reflected here in these materials. And yes, the limitation of the pool is unfortunate, but necessary, at least insofar as it relates to conflicts.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Have other counties arrived at the same conclusion regarding conflicts?
I really haven't checked that because we need to make our own judgment on that. And if another system was going to tolerate these conflicts, I would still recommend the LACERA not, as would Fiduciary Counsel.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Great. And just for our understanding, how long has Milliman had the current contract and how long has Siegel had the contracts that they have currently?
So for Milliman, it's since 1999, and for CAVMAC, it's since 2017, the last time that we bid.
Okay, great.
So if we can go to the next slide, please. This slide provides a high-level summary of the scope of services. Both the consulting and auditing services would require an annual actuarial evaluation, a triennial experience study, and GASB disclosure reports. The main difference is that the actuarial consultant would prepare these items, whereas the actuarial auditor would audit them. In addition, the actuarial consultant would consult with staff and trustees on benefit matters, regulations, and administration of the retirement plan and OPEB program. Next slide, please. This slide provides insight into the actuarial services reporting cycle for the retirement plan and OPEB program. This is done on a 3-year cycle. If you look at the column on the left, in the first fiscal year, the actuarial consultant is required to perform an actual evaluation as well as provide GASB disclosure reports and routine services, which we will discuss later. In the second fiscal year, the actuarial consultant is required to perform everything in year 1, plus the actuarial auditor provides GASB disclosure reports. In the third fiscal year, the actuarial consultant performs everything in year 1 plus an experience study. The actuarial auditor also audits that consultant's actuarial evaluation and experience study. LACERA anticipates the current actuarial consultant and actuarial auditor to perform these existing contractual work beyond fiscal year 2023. Next slide, please. This slide lists in more detail the actuarial consulting scope of services. There are 4 parts to the scope of work. 1, performing actuarial valuation services, which include calculating the retirement plan's funded status and contribution rates. performing the actuarial evaluation, and making recommendations to the board. 2, performing experience studies based on research assumptions and making recommendations to the boards. Next slide, please.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr.
question on
Kelly.
this slide. The previous slide. On number 1, the third bullet, no, sorry, the second bullet. Why are the end dates different? June 30th and July 1?
Good morning, Chair Sanchez, if I may. Trustee Kelly, that date dates back to 2006 when we first implemented the evaluation process for the OPEB program. And it's essentially a timing issue. At that time, it allowed the county to use evaluation report that was 2 years in arrears, which was compliant with the standards. In order to do it at that time, we had to date the report July 1. Essentially, all the data is as of June 30. The date part is just the anomaly.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing like a little bureaucracy. Okay, continuing.
Next slide, please. This is a continuation from the last slide. So 3, completing GASB disclosure reports as required for financial statement reporting. And 4, providing routine consulting services such as advising on technical or policy-related matters, updating actuarial factors and tables, providing routine calculations of retirement benefits, educating LACERA on new developments and standards, and making recommendations to the boards. Tina will now cover the actuarial auditing scope of services on the next slide.
Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, trustees. So LACERA is searching for an actual auditor to monitor the actual services performed by the consultant on behalf of LACERA. This is best practice encouraged by the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association. Here, the scope of service for the actual auditor is to audit key projects such as the annual actual evaluation, the triennial experience study, and the GASB disclosure reports. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I would like to direct your attention to the next 2 slides. It's on the proposed minimum qualification and the evaluation criteria, which are part of the recommendation that we're seeking your approval on. First, the firm respondents must be a professional actuarial services firm that has provided services to such as actuarial evaluation, experience study, audits, consulting services to public pension funds with OPEB program or similar entities to size and complexity of LACERA within the last 5 years. Secondly, the lead project manager must have a minimum of 5 years of actual experience working with public pension plans with OPEB programs, as well as have the credentials of either an associate of the Society of Actuaries or a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the proposed evaluation criteria. There are 4 evaluation buckets that we have been weighted based on what LACERA's internal stakeholder group determined to be desirable qualifications. So starting in the top left corner for organization background, which is weighted at 25%. We want to understand each firm's history and structure, the relevant engagement experience, conflicts and legal matters, insurance coverage, and DEI initiatives. And then in the lower left corner for team credentials, which is another 25%, we're looking at the proposed team's engagement experience, as well as their professional and academic qualifications. And then circling to the lower right, for the fee proposal, which is 10%, we will compare each proposal's fee at the engagement level and at the average hourly rates for a fair comparison. And then lastly, rounding out on the top right, for the evaluation of required services, which has the biggest allocation, 40%. Here, we want to understand each firm's detailed methodology and approach on how they will conduct the different actual services, evaluate their past work and reports, and their client communications. This bucket has the largest allocation because the actual services work that they're performing has the most direct impact to LACERA and our members. Next slide, please.
Madam Chair?
Oh,
Yes.
Thank you. On the fee proposal, are you going to allow the firm to request a COLA every year?
I think based on their proposal, we have seen it. We did do an evaluation of what the fees were for 2019 and 2022, and we did see a modest increase between those 3 years.
Okay, well, with inflation being what it is, I think you should proactively state that you will consider COLAs instead of just allowing the firm to assume it?
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I will disagree with that. I mean, this is, we're dealing with market equals here. We're not going to interfere with the negotiations between staff and the potential consultant. So if they feel that they need more money, they need to propose it. But I disagree with us just saying we are going to give you a 2% COLA increase as part of negotiations. And we should not get involved with that. That's my opinion.
That was not my statement. My statement was that you state that you would consider COLAs if proposed, not that you state what the COLA would be.
I still object. Let the negotiations remain and get us the best price.
Okay, Mr. Green?
Thanks, Madam Chair. That's already, you've already addressed it in the fee structure, correct? I mean, that's in the hot wash that'll come out of that, whatever.
Yes, they'll be
I
proposing.
mean, that's my understanding, that what Mr. Kelly's referring to is that will be talked during the fee assessment of the process.
That's correct. We're asking for both the actuarial consultant and the actuarial auditor to provide what the rates, what their hourly rates are, and what their rates would be for like each of the 3 projects for the next 5 years, plus the 2-year, 1-year extensions.
Okay, moving on.
Okay. So this slide gives a high-level overview of the evaluation process once we receive the RFP responses. As of now, we've already established an internal evaluation team consisting of multiple divisions across the organization. The team will then evaluate the responses and invite the top candidates back for interviews. After the internal evaluation review has concluded, we will bring the recommendation back to the BOI and ask the board to make the final RFP selection. Next slide, please. So, and lastly, want to share the timeline for the RFP search with the targeted milestone dates. If the MQ and the evaluation criteria is approved at today's meeting, we'll be posting the RFP next week. We expect to receive responses in early January next year and plan to bring the RFP selection back to board by April 2024. We're aiming for April 2024 to allow enough time to negotiate the contracts and transition work between the old and new actuarial firm, if that's the case. The tentative commence date for the next actuarial project that is in scope for this RFP is August 2024. This gives us a 4-month leeway to work through the details.
Okay, so with that, do we have any further questions and or a motion?
I'll move the item.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Madam Chair, I just have a quick question. The cap on the amount, I just was curious that I lost it on the slide. The cap amount, I mean, I think this is the point of a competitive market I just was wondering about the existing cap, if it's that going to be in it, because I think the initial, it's up to, remind me if I don't, 200, what is it? What's the ask here is less than what the top amount is, right?
That's correct.
So is it still up to that amount, or are we just going to be voting on the ask amount?
I guess to kind of give a gauge, like for the retirement.
Where is that, by the way? I'm sorry. Can you pull it up? I just saw it.
Well, I guess we can give details, but like for the retirement plan and the OPEB program, we're having it broken down where like they would provide what the project fees would be. So for Milliman in 2022, they proposed $150,000 for 3 projects. It would include the actuarial evaluation, the experience study, and the GASB reports. And then for the OPEB program, they had estimated it at $258,000 for a total of $408,000 cumulatively. For the actuarial auditor, CAVMAC, in 2022, they proposed for the same 3 projects, $136,000 for the retirement plan. And then for the OPEB program, it was $174,000 for a total of $310,000. So when we add what the cost would be for both the actuarial consultant and the actuarial auditor, it's, I would say like around $700,000 total.
And so that's the ask then, is the approval up to, for the RFP, up to.
Around there, yes.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
I got a point.
Yes.
So, and then we also have, the fee is evaluated by the interviewing committee, and it will be worth 10 points. 10%.
Correct, yes.
Sorry, thank you. So, I mean, it's clear. We're not here to give money away. They have to negotiate it, and the interviewing committee will assign the respective percentage given the fee, and that will be evaluated in the total presentation that they make. Correct?
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Santos speaks Jason, so I that's what I'm saying, like, what is the, what are we ultimately looking at? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your translation services, Mr. Santos. All right, we have a motion and a second.
Just want to make sure that everything is clear.
Mr. Jason Green,
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones. Aye. Mr. Jones.
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. David Green,
Aye.
Mr. Knox.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Item B, we have a board approval of the appointment to a special step placement for the CEO's proposed appointee for Senior Staff Counsel. And that is for Jean J. Kim. So, Mr. Lugo, will you be taking that or
Yes, Madam Chair.
guessing this?
Yep, I'll be brief with my comments. There is a memo dated October 25th. A similar item came to the BOI for Information Technology Manager. What staff is recommending now is a special placement for a senior staff counsel. It'll be for our benefits division within legal. We're looking for the trustee's support. It supersedes the CEO's authority, although the CEO is the appointing authority. The staff level supersedes his authority, so that's why we're coming to trustees. A little bit of background: this was an outside recruitment we used, and as part with most of our legal counsel positions, it was extremely diligent search for us to get to the point where we have a well-qualified candidate for our senior benefits counsel position. We're extremely pleased, and it's as you see within the memo, this individual is highly credentialed, and we're excited about the opportunity for her to join LACERA. And with that, I have legal as well as HR to stand for any questions.
Move approval.
Yes. Second?
I'll second it.
Okay. We have an approval and a second. Mr. Kelly has a comment, and then I'll have a comment, and we can vote.
Thank you. My question was, the requested salary is less than the candidate's current salary. And I was wondering if you could, that's an unusual dynamic. I was wondering if you could comment on that?
That's correct, that the salary she's being offered at LACERA is less than, it's the most we can offer her, but it's less than what she's currently making.
Was there any discussion about factors that she considered in accepting a salary less than her current one?
We have been in discussions with this candidate for many, many months, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to get into a lot of her personal feelings. But I will say that this was, we had a lot of discussions with her about the advantages of coming to LACERA rather than remaining in her current private sector position. And she ultimately saw those advantages.
Okay, and this position reports directly to you?
I'm sorry?
Does this position report directly to you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Mr. Knox?
Yeah, just quickly, and I would point out, as many of us know, that salary doesn't include matching from 401, 457. So there are other factors besides base salary that can make up gaps sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So,
Chair,
yes,
if I may,
Mr. Green?
At your discretion, if you want. I think this is what we've been talking about, with the limitations of being able to hire the folks that we need to hire.
Yeah, that's my comment.
Did I beat?
Yeah, you beat me to
I
it,
don't
but
want
go
to steal
for
your
it.
thunder,
Go for it,
but
Mr. Green.
this is important. This is this process that's happening with this individual. We're lucky. She's coming in with her experience base and whatnot, and that stroke of luck for us. We getting the talent we need. We have to. That takes effort by the individual, And the individual coming should be compensated, for retention. And I think that's my whole point. People should be paid what they're worth. So anyway, that's my thing.
Let me translate it.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and do another quick translation. So a couple of things. One, I think that these are coming to us more and more often as a reflection of the current labor environment that we are in. And, the fact that we are committed to having qualified professional staff means that we are really hitting our limits very quickly. So I think, if anything, this underscores our need to be able to make decisions that are appropriate and within our own legal authority. So this is certainly nothing to do with this, but I think it's important to say that. The other thing that I think it might be worth taking to the JOG-C is that it also feels like Mr. Kryman's authority is also hitting up against the limits of inflation at this point. Some of these things shouldn't have to come to the board. I think it unnecessarily exposes qualified candidates to public exposure that is not healthy, or it's not necessary, except that we are hitting a technicality. And so if I were in her shoes, I'd be really annoyed that my information was being discussed publicly. So I think that we might also consider for the JOG-C a conversation about how inflation is impacting the limitations across the organization as to what should be appropriate budgeting authority given where we are now and what things cost. So that has nothing to do with this, but something to think about for a future agenda on another board, on another committee. But so we have a motion and we have a second.
Mr. Jason Gray?
Yes?
I could make another point.
Yes.
I'm in support of Ms. Sanchez's comments regarding the CEO. We do have a JOG-C committee meeting it's 15, I believe.
November 16th, correct.
Hopefully that will make it into that agenda. Please.
One point of clarification on this item, which is really appreciate the dialogue on that, is that would require a county salary ordinance change, but we can certainly request one. Because this requirement that the CEO can only approve up to level 12 and the boards need to approve anything above level 12 is in the county salary ordinance.
Oh, kill me now.
So we will discuss that at the JOG-C.
Okay. So, well, there you go. Again, further reason as to.
Anyway.
I don't even know what to say. Okay, fine. And we're done. Any last comments? All right, we have a motion and we have a second.
Mr. Jason Green?
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. David Green?
Aye.
And Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to reports. The first report we have is our governance review and delegated authority framework, culminating 7 months of work or more. And hours of conversation. So, all right, and we will be having Mr. Grable, Mr. Perez, Mr. Drazel, Mr. Fila, Ms. Liu, Mr. Nguyen, and Ms. Rivera have all opined on these, on what we're going to see here today. So who's going to lead off the discussion?
Tim.
All right, Mr. Fila, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. You stole a little bit of my thunder. I did want to really emphasize how collaborative this project has been, particularly in this very last stage of it. As Chair Sanchez pointed out, we started this work really at the beginning of the year when planning for the board offsite, and the rest of the review kind of sprung out of that. But in particular, this last leg, we had to be responsive to the information that we gathered through multiple education sessions, the survey work that we did in September, and ourselves and staff really had no idea what the consensus around any of these topics would be, such that we had to really put together quite a crack team to get some of these recommendations into this material that you're going to see. So I think with that, maybe I'll hand it over to Scott and see if he wants to go from there, or maybe Ashley wants to do slide 4.
Sure, let's jump to, good morning, Ms. Chair and trustees. Let's jump to slide 4, if we can, where we've asked Fiduciary Counsel to provide some legal guidance on considerations that the board would want to keep in mind in considering whether, when, where, and how to delegate certain authorities. So with that, Ashley Dunning, LACERA's Fiduciary Counsel.
Yes.
Good morning, members of the board. So I'm a little later to the discussion of this particular delegation at LACERA, but this is a very important topic that is pertinent to many boards across the country right now in the public pension space. And fortunately, we have some very clear guidance under California law on this topic. And that is that boards of public retirement funds have the authority to delegate certain investment functions. And in fact, you have the responsibility when it is most prudent to do so, The question then becomes, what do you delegate? How do you delegate it? To whom you delegate it? And how you supervise. And so that's the framework, and this slide walks through the specific legal sources for those conclusions. Certainly, when you delegate a function as a fiduciary, though, the key is that an additional key to how that delegation occurs is that you retain an oversight and monitoring responsibility. And so you do need to make sure, as is set forth in great detail through these materials, that you will be receiving this sorts of reporting on a regular basis so that you can ask the questions you need to ask, so that it provides an opportunity to identify concerns that may warrant adjustment. And then also that allows you to stay a little bit out of the weeds from the day-to-day business of the management of the investment portfolio, which is really what you hire your staff and your investment managers to do, and to discuss important topics like asset allocation, portfolio construction, that sort of thing. Happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay.
So the bottom line, thank you for your comments.
Certainly.
The bottom line is that this board remained, with delegated authority, remained liable for any issues that we will have. I mean, at the end of the day, the buck is stopped with this board. So that means that we have a responsibility to manage the staff, monitor the staff, I should say, and the CIO. And that is really important to emphasize that the fact that we delegate authority, and we have done that already in the co-investing, for example, and others, the bottom line is that the responsibility is ours. So I just want to make sure that everybody fully understands that this is not a get out of jail card free, that you can say, well, it was the CIO or the staff who made a mistake or whatever the case may be, because if a court finds that this board failed to properly supervise and monitor the performance, we will be liable. So in other words, trust will verify.
Yeah.
True?
I agree with your last statement. Trust but verify, certainly. The way I would state it is that you always retain the responsibility. I don't know that I would state it as a liability, but that's a damages question. You always retain the responsibility in the sense that you cannot fully delegate your authority away. It remains with you as fiduciaries, but you are delegating it as you delegate it to other fiduciaries. They have a similar response. They have the same responsibility you do. They have the same risk, whether it's liability or just responsibility as you do.
Yeah.
In this context, it's abundantly clear that this is not a set and forget circumstance.
Yep.
Ever.
Great.
For anyone in this whole spectrum of delegation and retention of authority.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Great.
If it wasn't clear, it is abundantly clear now. Let's move on to the framework.
Great. So we can move to slide 5. As trustees have seen in the materials, we have drafted revisions to the IPS, which are attachment 2, and there are additional attachments I'll speak to. But I'll talk you through what the working group, in conjunction with Fiduciary Counsel and Tim and Makita's close involvement and our internal counsel, have put together. Before I jump into that, I can say that in considering, how and whether to delegate, we're mindful that the recent discussions between Makita and the trustees have identified a number of objectives. So we thought it would be useful to summarize those up front. That includes, of course, making sure that any delegated authority framework is firmly rooted in fiduciary duty. That was just discussed with Ashley. That includes ensuring effective information and reporting going to the board so that trustees are exercising informed oversight. We also included here that there was discussion in recent months that as part of our strategic plan to move from allocator to best-in-class investor, Trustee Jones and others raised the question of let's be attentive to trying to strive for best-in-class governance. So the working group kind of grappled with if we could envision what would it look like to try to optimize both the board's role in setting strategy and policy, as well as optimizing the staff's role in carrying out that board-approved policy and parameters in a way that ideally we can all end up greater than the sum of our parts. So that's the gauntlet kind of thrown down to us all. Of course, we also want to be fit for purpose. There was discussion that we're growing. So how can we try to have a framework that positions us for stable and durable growth? And lastly, we're mindful that we have had expanded delegated authorities, including the co-investment program. So we try to be attentive to what aspects of those delegations we're working. What type of information, trend lines, analysis might be positive to keep in mind. So let's move to slide 6. With those objectives in mind, we tried to think of some principles, where that would guide what a framework might look like. First of which being clarity in roles with adequate controls to reinforce good governance. That includes trying to foresee what we can foresee, but also maintaining a system of checks and balances that can be dynamic to navigate situations as they arise. Those checks and balances in these circumstances include the internal investment committee, are the role of the board-approved investment consultants and others that we'll speak to. We also, have a repeated chorus of harmony in our policies, trying to avoid policy proliferation. So to the extent that we can consolidate where trustees and staff find guidance, we want to try to continue to harmonize and consolidate policies.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If I may, Madam
Yes.
Chair. So with regards to the checks and balances, it's in your report every month, Mr. Grable, on a particular investment that was made the previous month. Are you going to, or maybe you're already doing it, but I could be mistaken. In your reporting, you will discuss that the matter went through the internal investment committee before it came to you.
Madam Chair and Mr. Santos, when we report out currently items that have been delegated, typically there is a process checklist in there. So yes.
And there is a full memo that comes to the board.
And that will continue?
Yes.
If this is granted. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's very important to me that all investments, as stated here, get vetted through the internal staff committee before it goes to the CIO. I think it's
Yeah. And within the policy, it also states that the memo has to come back to the board. That's part of our oversight. Otherwise, we're not doing our job. Okay, let's continue. So I want to just take a pause here too. I know you still have a couple of things to go through, but I just want to compliment the team because I know this was a big, piece of work. I'd like to compliment the team on what I think are excellent principles. When I read them, for me, it hit all of the things that I was concerned about. I was concerned about clarity. I was certainly concerned about checks and balances, board oversight, and the sort of demands that places on the board, and so that we reiterate that we have that responsibility and we are committed to doing our job. I really like the way you laid this out, so I just want to take a moment to thank the staff and the team that put this together for what I think are a strong set of principles to help guide us.
Great, thank you. And we'll unpack that board oversight a little bit more, but
Absolutely.
As mentioned, item 4 is the pivotal and crucial element of board oversight, including reporting back to the board. And lastly, really durability, trying to build something that can stand the test of time, which helps any large dynamic organization thrive. So with that, let's jump into what some of the revised proposed language is. We can move to slide 7. Slide 7 highlights that kind of the framework per se. We've included a proposed investment belief. Last month, trustees, while reviewing peer practices, it was observed that some peer plans have an explicit investment belief, and it was thrown out that perhaps LACERA could or should consider an investment belief addressing governance and delegation. So you have in the red line version a simple pithy statement that underscores the importance of strong governance in generating the agency's success, and includes a trifecta or a three-legged stool of sorts that really highlights the critical role of the board in setting strategy and policies, the critical role of any delegation being prudent, to echo the advice and guidance of Fiduciary Counsel, and then that third prong being, again, effective oversight and controls, checks and balances. So this is in the red line version for trustees' consideration to underscore the importance of governance. Let's move to slide 8. On slide 8 is a pictorial representation of what all the red lines and various highlights would look like to try to illustrate what we're talking about here. It starts on the left with the board setting strategy and policy, again, for the portfolio, including the current powers to define the investment policy statement, the strategic asset allocation, which leads LACERA's investment beliefs as the primary determinant of returns, as well as setting the specific investment guidelines and parameters for each asset class, which is current practice, goes before the board as you review and approve each structure review for every asset class. With those policies and parameters in place, moving to the right, staff would continue to identify and diligence asset managers that fit the board-approved investment guidelines, parameters, and guardrails laid out in the asset allocation and the structure reviews, with external consultants conducting their own independent review of each prospective manager. Internal investment committees would review each mandate with a requirement for majority approval. The investment consultant would also not just review, but provide a concurrence and ensure that all of those policies are in line, or any allocation is in line with the board-approved investment guidelines. Lastly, the CIO would review and approve as guided by board-set policies, and then report back to the board. So that's kind of that loop back, either as a kind of a infinity loop or a figure 8 of sorts, really kind of going back to the board. Critical for this framework is that really item 7 across the bottom, we want to try to articulate that this really requires ongoing regular board oversight and monitoring, as articulated across not just that every mandate would be reported to the board in a timely fashion, but also elevating the discussion with the quarterly performance, or the CIO's monthly report, quarterly performance reviews, thematic reports like risk and compliance, and we'll get into that a little bit more specifically.
Can I just make a comment as well here? I do, first of all, whoever came up with this graphic, I think should get an award. It is a very, very strong graphic. And I think it's not only strong because it shows that this is a regular conversation that continuously happens, but also in that it recognizes the size and importance of the decisions that happen. And I think this is important, meaning that the most impactful decisions, and if you look at most studies, not any, depending on which study you talk about, anywhere from 96% to 104% of a plan's return is made by the first 3 items that we do, right? Which is the decisions that the board retains. The decision as to what our asset allocation will be, the decision as to what the structure reviews should look like, that remains our purview. And in fact, to some degree, this gives us a mandate as a board to focus on that and be better at that, and to focus our education there so that we can make better policy. So I do think that in a lot of ways, the notion of best governance as a way of best utilizing the resources that we have, this really does a good job of highlighting this. One thing I will ask that we add, and this is a small wordsmithing item, which is number 7, continuous board oversight and monitoring. That first item is the item that is very important to me, which is that the CIO authorized investments are promptly reported back to the board. This is that we get a full board memo. Please add and terminations, investments and terminations. I do think both need to be reviewed and reported to the board. I think it was probably assumed, but let's make it explicit. Thanks.
I also have a comment on this.
Yeah.
In addition to powers retained by the board, is the ability to hire the consultants, and I know we're going to get to that later on, but this board will retain the ability to hire the consultants, and the consultants have to understand that they work directly for the board. Of course, they have to coordinate very closely with the staff. And also, obviously, this board is going to retain the ability to hire the actuarial consultant firm. But to the point that I raised earlier, number 6, second bullet, it clearly states, right, that all matters go to the investments committee before it gets approved to the CIO. Again, I'm emphasizing that because to me that's very important. So although, which I disagree with Fiduciary Counsel, we always have to worry about liability and damages for anything that we do. So liability is key, in my view. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for the input.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
And I just want to echo what other trustees have shared, that this graphic is very clear, and it's very creative as well to show the interlockings of the responsibility. So I do appreciate it. I did have a question, and I don't know if we just cited this for the obvious, or I don't know what the thoughts were. But the second bullet under number 7 says that CIO sourced investment opportunities require BOI review and approval. But I think it's our intent that most investment opportunities would go through the full vetting process with staff, correct? So I'm not quite sure why we would have that scenario.
Yeah, I'll dive in a little there, and then I'll let you. The full vetting process would occur actually, but the difference is if the CIO brings in sources an idea, puts it through the paces, and then retains the authority to approve it himself, it can create a lack of check.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but tell me if I've misstated that.
It's absolutely correct that any management or any investment proposal would go through the normal course. But we tried to identify possible unintended consequences, one of them being the CIO could exert intentionally or unintentionally undue influence. And to the extent that a CIO, whomever that could be in the future, might have a relationship or might kind of make a heavy suggestion, we wanted guardrails that would then go to the board, which has a responsibility for the CIO's performance and so forth. And that can be one component of mitigating that risk.
Understood. Okay. It's not bypassing the other process. It's just saying that it requires the board approval. Understood. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Abundance of caution.
Conservative.
Yes.
I don't know if we're going to get to it, but the language in the policy revisions, I just have some questions regarding it. Everything looks good. I just want to get clarification and possibly the changes between the board's responsibility to be informed, the duty to stay informed, second paragraph on page 14, the revision, the board has the duty to stay informed, including requesting, receiving, and reviewing information to monitor inquiries based off that information and assist its responsibilities. Then moving down to the CIO's responsibility, the last paragraph on page 14, I like the language that the CIO and staff assist. I don't see anywhere in the document or the revisions that staff or the CIO will. It's changing to that it's our responsibility to get the information, but it seems that that's what's being removed is that direction or advisement from staff or the CIO to the board, like, hey, this is possibly something that you guys should request through board approval, if that makes sense.
I'm sorry, what paragraph was that?
We're on page 14. We're on page 14 of
it's the second paragraph.
investment policy statement.
Which I agree with the language, that we have the responsibility to stay informed, but it seems like, and maybe it's addressed in the document and I've lost it, but the statement in the last paragraph of 14, the CIO and staff will assist the board in performing its fiduciary duty. That assistant could be a recommendation. I don't see any language in here that if Mr. Grable was sitting up here and saying, this is definitely something we should look into, and then it comes to the board, for us to request that report. Unless I'm missing it, I don't see that language in there. Specifically, that the CIO and staff will make recommendations to the board. Yes, sir.
I think if you just look on the top sentence on page 15, most of it's captured there, but maybe we have an opportunity to improve on this. The CIO and investment staff manage the portfolio according to the board's policies, advise and inform the board about investments, assist with development and review of investment policies and procedures, et cetera. So I think
but make recommendations would be probably my ask or add or something for analysis that think tank that's in that process would then say, we recommend to the board to move forward with this information gathering, because
So you're basically adding and make appropriate recommendations at the end of that sentence.
as they see fit, yeah, something to that effect.
Because basically what it says right now is they will advise and inform the board about investments. They will assist with the development and review of the investment policies and procedures. And what Mr. Green is looking for is, and also make recommendations
For our decision-making process to gather information. If you say, hey, this is something we should look into, we mill it over.
Offer a solution.
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
Yeah.
And we can certainly, I think, tweak that clause on the top of page 15.
I think we can.
Advise, inform, and make
I put it to the board. I mean, I'm just.
Yeah, I think that we can just explicitly add that right now. Basically advise, so the sentence would read, the CIO investment staff manage the portfolio according to the board's policies, advise and inform the board about investments, assist with the development and review of investment policies and procedures, comma, and make, what was the,
Yeah, make recommendations to the board,
and make any appropriate recommendations. And make any appropriate recommendations.
We'd be very comfortable with that.
For our determination.
Yeah, I do think that is important because that's the hard work of policymaking is often the first draft.
Sure.
Yeah, and then which allows us to meet our responsibility in that second paragraph on 14, which is has the duty to stay informed, including requesting, receiving. If we don't have a little nudge to maybe that we should request something, you know.
Great, and that's certainly the spirit of the framework is making sure it's providing a plethora of channels for information flow and advice, caution, so forth, kind of coming back to the board. I think the spirit is that line advise and inform is kind of all encompassing, but you certainly welcome making it more explicit. So
Okay.
thank you.
So, and make any appropriate recommendations is really what we've added to that sentence.
Yes.
Assuming that's grammatically correct.
Yes.
Okay.
With that.
Great.
So this is, the infinity loop on slide 8. Certainly, arguably, we could have sized the board's role more prominently if strategic asset allocation is 90% of returns typically. But
Madam Chair, yeah, I've had my
Yes,
hand
we
up.
have Mr. Jones and Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, no problem. I just realized I'm remote and have the hand up here. So just had a question, again, compliment to the person who came up with the chart. So it also inspires another question as it relates to this a little bit, and would want to get your opinion is in this model now, does the relationship evolve likewise from a board perspective with our consultants, right? So does the nature of our engagement with them as an extension of the board kind of evolve to something, I'm just going to say different so as not to weight it, but just kind of, did you guys have a chance to kind of contemplate at all whether there's, more engagement, from consultants is a part of the monitoring in role, and part of that information question, do we rely a little bit more on our consultants from a board perspective? Just any thoughts that you guys may have given to in this kind of now virtuous flow of accountability and delegation and oversight, whether the nature of our current consulting engagement evolves at all.
I can make a comment, and Tim, I'm sure, has a thought as well. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Sorry, Mr. Jones, mic just went off. But I'll make a comment, and Tim can certainly jump in. Let's maybe go to slide 10. In this dynamic, certainly in the proposed framework, the board continues to select consultants, continues to have free, access to consultants. Consultants are performing for LACERA and the board in reviewing every prospective asset manager in conjunction with staff. But one thought that we've had is that on slide 10, you see a summary of various reports and topics for the board to delve into. And we would aim through this framework to really elevate the opportunity for more oversight where the consultants really play a pivotal role. So exploring more the quarterly performance reviews, the annual performance reviews. Included in those are the emerging manager performance reviews, thematic areas like risk and compliance, which the board currently gets, but this might afford the opportunity for more trend analysis and deeper discussion, and the consultants are certainly crucial to that role.
I would just say simply that the nature of the role doesn't change. I do potentially foresee some additional involvement. The search activity may change, just the opportunity to be more responsive to market dynamics, and some of those things could change maybe the cadence of the work, but I don't see anything changing in the nature of what we do now and the responsibility that we hold to the board.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. You are selected by the board, and you still report to the board, and you act as our eyes and ears in the process to ensure that we are made aware and have a second opinion on the investments that we make. So I think that that continues for sure. Just the amount of work might go up in this. I mean, I don't know if any.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the way I see the role of the consultants is a separate eyes in addition to the staff that will opine on a particular recommendation. And that is important in my view, although damages, we don't have to worry about it. What I do worry about is that I want to be able to sleep at night because I have the recommendation of the staff and I know how hard they work. And then we have an independent consultant who's also looking at a particular recommendation or particular report and opines on that particular recommendation. To me, I think it's important because I need to be able to rely on the work that the staff did and the work that the consultant did in case I'm faced with some sort of liability later on. It was a reasonable vote that I took based on the information that I gathered from these two distinct individuals or firms, the staff and the consultant. And
Okay.
that to me is incredibly powerful. It allows me to sleep good at night.
Okay, great. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Can we go back to slide 8?
Yes, slide 8.
So there are a couple things here I wanted to talk about. One is under 5, internal committee approval. So in essence, we're delegating not to the CIO, but to the committee to an extent greater than we currently do. But there's no process in place for an annual committee evaluation. In other words, committees do not evaluate how they've done their work throughout the year. We've yet, I don't understand why, but we've yet to implement evaluations at either the committee level or the full board level in this organization. But I would look to, if I'm delegating to, in essence, the internal committee, I would look to an evaluation completed by the internal committee about their effectiveness in the current year or the prior period. That's number one. Number two is, I didn't see any expanded role in this framework for internal audit. I do think that if we're delegating to whomever we are delegating, CIO or internal committee, I would look for a role of internal audit to come back in on the back end and evaluate whether or not these processes align with related procedures and policy. And I didn't see that, so I would look for that to be somewhere. And I do concur with my colleagues' comments on the work here. This was a tremendous amount of work, and I appreciate all the work that all partners put in. I mean, it was a real partnership. But I do get a little bit confused in looking at some of the terms. So, for example, internal committee and approval and consultant concurrence. I concur with that. And the third bullet says concurrence from external consultant must be obtained for manager selection and termination. Okay, but the committee is also going to vote on, the committee itself will also consider external, but will also consider manager selection and termination. And then under CIO approval, it says prior internal committee approval is required before CIO can approve new investments or terminations. That's duplicative to me. So what I was missing, maybe it's somewhere in here, is to say we're delegating to internal committee everything but, and then following what are the exceptions? The exceptions would be co-source investment opportunities that we currently have. So I was a little bit confused about that. In other words, what does the CIO retain himself or herself to effect that would not be an action of the internal committee? And I would just want to understand that better. So those are my comments.
So my interpretation of it is the internal committees don't have any final approval authority. It's a process step, so to make sure that the ideas are thoroughly diligenced and that multiple viewpoints are brought into it, but the actual authority lies with the CIO is my interpretation.
Okay, that's not the second bullet under number 5.
I think it's just that the CIO approval, maybe graphically it doesn't come through, but sits on top of all of this.
Right,
as
that's
the
going
as the
from-
final step, kind of, as you're following the candy cane ladder or whatever, you have to kind of get through 5 to get to 6. Or Chutes and ladders or whatever it is.
Okay, I get that, but if 5 says no, it doesn't
It never goes
pass
through
the
the CIO.
CIO gate to get to this, I'm sorry, it doesn't pass the committee gate to get to the CIO.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
But are there any actions that do not require committee review or consideration or approval that would still rest with the CIO responsibilities?
All investments go through the committees?
Yeah, no, everything actually goes through the committees,
Okay.
even
co-sourced investment opportunities?
Even-
Because that under 7 says require BIO review and approval, but I'm thinking, okay, well, if everything goes through committees, why does that come to the BIO as an action step prior to CIO approval? BIO review and approval.
Oh, that is
That's the
only
que-
in the,
yeah,
that's
that
it,
was the
that, yeah,
question
yeah.
That was the question I had just asked. And so my understanding now of this is that it will go through the internal committee, but if it's something that the CIO has presented first, then that then requires us to give the full approval. But they shared with me that all of the decision-making as far as the investments are concerned do have to go through the internal committee first.
And what would the downside be of requiring this go through the internal committee? In other words, the fewer exceptions in my mind to the framework, the better.
That's the
So
only
the-
exception, as far as I can tell. That's the only exception, which is the rare exception that that a CIO sources an opportunity, brings it, and of course either directly, indirectly has influence over the process, and then approves it himself or herself. Then we've lost a key control.
Okay.
And so it just simply means that if you as a CIO are going to source opportunities, that those exceptions are the exceptions that would have to be approved by us as a body.
Okay, got it. So given that then, that opportunity would not have previously been included in 1, 2, or 3.
It would be.
It would have been included?
Yes. Everything has to go through the full process. This
No,
process has no exceptions.
It just jumps 6 in that.
But
If
I'm
it's
saying-
CIO originated, like it can't be CIO approved. So essentially that
Right.
moves on to 7.
No, I
to
get that, but
6.
if it's okay, the CIO originates it, it's a new investment opportunity, so it would not have previously been included in investment policy statement, strategic asset allocation, or an asset class structure review.
Oh, if it's a
Oh,
totally
you're
new
talking
asset
about-
category, I would agree. If it was something that was outside of that, I don't think that any of our process oversight would allow that idea to be entertained before it was contemplated in a strategic asset allocation review.
That's correct. So anything that goes, any investment that goes through 4, 5, 6 has to be within the parameters of the board set strategic asset allocation and all of the investment guidelines. If it's not, it has to go back to the board.
Yeah, so it would fail probably at 1, and it would also fail at 3 at that point in time. So it would never advance to those other stages.
So those are the controls to make sure that,
We don't go
CIO
rogue and suddenly
staff
invest in
aren't
movies.
Investing in a flashy new
Okay.
Which is the reason why I was making sure that the reporting reflects all this.
Yeah.
And that is very important. Because, I mean, it would be interesting to see, I don't think it will ever happen, at least with the current configuration of the staff, that after the committee voted against a CIO recommendation, that then the CIO is going to bring it to the board. But you never know.
Right.
That's
If there,
fine.
if there were ever anything outside of the investment guidelines, you would see that because it's being reported back.
Okay.
Back.
Okay, for me to approve this, I would still look to an annual performance evaluation by each committee, and then some role for internal audit review on the back end.
Is that added, just a question on that, is that added to a procedure or is that added into the IPS?
I can highlight that the board received a report a few months ago on the operations of the internal committees. Those are subject to internal procedure guidance that across asset class team developed. And certainly it seems prudent that there can be a additional line within that procedural policy for an annual self-evaluation and suggestions. Of course, for the board, you conduct an annual performance review of the CIO. So how internal processes are operating, that provides some, a crucial role in looking at.
And we participate in an annual review for the consultants as well.
Yeah, and to the extent that most likely the CIO is the chairman of the internal investment committee, essentially, I think structurally you can just include it in that review and have that be an expanded section of that already existing oversight.
I think actually to very clearly address what Mr. Kelly is suggesting is, I think for the self-evaluation, I'm not sure that necessarily has to be explicit, but if you were going to make it explicit, it would be explicit in the roles and responsibilities of staff, which would probably be under the CIO asking, so this is, I'm on page, which page am I on? Sorry, I can't see the page number. I'm in section B, sorry, I'm in section 4, item B, staff, under Chief Investment Officer. Chief Investment Officer and staff. We could add to the bottom that the Chief Investment Officer will conduct a process for the investment committee to do a self-evaluation and as part of that process. That's not very well worded, but that's the idea that I think you're looking for. And then in addition, you would need a subsection little item 4, internal audit. In addition, so below chief counsel and legal staff, there would be a kind of subsection 4, internal audit, and a sentence to create an important role for internal audit to participate in oversight as a proper control for the organization. So that would just be a little item 4, internal audit, and a sentence. Would that be what you're looking for?
Yeah, that'd be fine. And to be clear, internal audit's plate is already full. So that likely has a workload impact to internal audit that I would ask our executive management to consider in budget preparation.
But to be fair, internal audit already has a lot of oversight. It's just never been explicitly put in here. So to some degree, that actually already exists. It's just, we're just simply recognizing it. So I don't think it necessarily creates, because there's still quite a bit of burden already on internal audit, 2 processes. Yeah.
So, and my question, and it may go to internal audit, but what you're specifically looking for, I think, should be reviewed also by our audit firm that has a specialty of reviewing, our process and procedures as part of our internal controls. But I don't know if our internal audit, do they have the staff that's specifically qualified to audit this particular inner workings of the investment committee?
Mr. Bendel, everyone's turning and looking at you. Yes.
I'm not sure I fully understand the role that we would play. I'm always reticent that we don't get involved in a line quality function. We are independent, and as I think was mentioned, we have an oversight over the entire organization in terms of risk-based audits. So if this is a continual, and that's, I guess it's just, I need to get clarification on what that role would be. It sounds almost like it's a line function that we'd be serving. So I'm just not 100% sure if that's a role we should be playing or not.
Well, technically, I mean, the argument that I'm making is you're already playing it by virtue of having the responsibility to audit investments already. That's part of your investment work plan. That's part of your audit work plan. And so to some degree, it may be overly explicit to put it in here, and I recognize your concern, so maybe we leave that out. But we recognize that internal audit does have authority to audit processes and procedures, which is already a part of your work plan.
Exactly. We'd
is that
certainly
fair?
be looking at that evaluation, and that would be within our scope to look at that from an independent standpoint, but not necessarily have an ongoing role in
Okay, so
forming
then
that
I'm
work.
going to strike that item 4. Are you okay with that, Mr. Kelly?
Yeah, I would defer to the audit committee.
Yeah. But at the very least, I think that it exists, regardless of whether we want to put it in here or not. Audit is still going to have it as a part of their work plan to come in and poke around. But so far we have simply 2 changes that we have made. One to provide for a self-evaluation process, and one to make recommendations as necessary for policy. So are there any other?
Madam Chair, just real quick before you take that, but the internal audit would highlight and flag anything that out of this process, if there was something that was overlooked, that should be captured in that audit already, right? Just by the sheer nature of it, and so it would bring attention to it.
Certainly, we're assessing operations, and if that's something that we're looking at in our risk assessment and ongoing assessments, if it's something that stands out as an issue, we would definitely bring that to light.
And then the process would be looking at this revised policy and seeing where the gap was. Right?
Exactly, we're evaluating the process. Yeah.
So I
Comfortable?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so right now we only have 2 additions in terms of, are we in agreement in our redlining?
Sure.
Great.
Understood. And I can add that there's some catch-all phrases here that the staff has to act in accordance with board-approved policies. So that cross-references, incorporates all other board-approved policies and programs without trying to cross-speak on them.
Great, yeah. All right, so we have now, I think, exhausted the candy cane chutes and ladders. I still love this. I mean, this is like, I'm gonna hang this on my wall.
Okay, because we're just jumping
We're-
now to the changes.
Well,
'Cause
I think we still have to go through the controls, so there's still more to go through.
Okay. I can wait till the end. If we wanted to just shoot through the document and get through with it.
Well, maybe if we could just make sure we cover slide 11, because, slide 12. And then we could shoot through the document.
Sure. So on slide 12, we wanted to test, try to identify unintended consequences, try to identify checks and balances that any framework for delegated authority, should be attentive to. So we've laid out here some Q&As of possible risks that could arise. One we've already spoken about on the CIO exerting undue influence. So there's a slew of parameters to try to mitigate that risk. I'd highlight at the bottom as well, we know that recent board discussions mentioned what if the board wanted to change course at some point. So we've incorporated into the IPS an explicit reference for policy review that aligns with other LACERA policies, that the IPS can be reviewed at any time with the board's discretion, and typically is reviewed after the board adopts a new strategic asset allocation, which is referenced as 3 to 5 years. So that allows, in theory, flexibility for any revisions should they be needed. We've also mentioned questions on, is there a risk of unknown or unforeseen concentration in certain geographies or managers? And those are really set by the board in the structure reviews, which we've included as attachment 3, the full slew of investment guidelines, and we've summarized quickly in slide 9 of how the parameters and guardrails that the board sets really define what's permissible as an investment. So those are some Q&As for the board's consideration. Slide 13 is a quick reference that this is intended to hopefully echo the board's strategic plan to hopefully enhance efficiencies while moving increasingly to a best-in-class investor. And depending on today's discussion, the next steps in slide 14 would be adopting the IPS, including the incorporation of key powers defined and roles and responsibilities and powers defined in reserve policy. We would want to bring back some additional tweaks to the board charter, as well as the procurement policy for investment-related services. And typically, the OPEB and IPS mirrors the IPS. We were mindful that the investment guidelines and the structure reviews vary a little bit asset class to asset class. So we would also anticipate bringing those back to ensure that they're fully harmonized. It might be worth highlighting on slide 11, and we hope that this is clear in the red line. But in the spirit of underscoring the board's role as setting policy and overseeing strategy, the red line is pulling a variety of roles highlighted in a green font in that attachment 3 from the powers reserved. So the only new role in the IPS is that making explicit that the board is approving the structure reviews. That's current practice. We're just making it explicit in the red line. And on the right side, we're in the purple font in the IPS, we're recommending or suggesting that we pull that Appendix B of delegated CIO authorities into the body of the IPS. The only new change there would be the CIO's authority to approve manager selection and termination.
Right. Great.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm in the queue.
We have Ms. Jones and Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just, wanted to share that in looking at the document and all of the work that went into consolidating some of the information, looking at best practices, there was a lot of steps that I am sure a group or a team of folks undertook to come back to this one red line document. So there's a lot of layers that went on to get to this point. So I'm very appreciative of the efforts and the work and the information that has been provided along the way in this process. I have very little, recommendations or changes. I think my one comment is that I do like that there is here in this document an identification of what pieces came from where. But I do think good practice is if you footnote some of the pieces that correlate with other documents, so that if those documents are ever changed in the future, then this document can also be updated or vice versa if there's this overlap. And so small footnotes are sometimes helpful in that you will know to go back to the other document for updates. So where there's an overlap, that may be helpful. I did have a question. Let's go first to my one, which was page 17. I appreciate the statement that was added. However, it's kind of open. It says at the discretion of the board. Does that require the majority of the board? Or can one person just say, I want to look at the policy? I mean, do we want to give some parameters?
Technically speaking, the way that we work is any single board member can agendize something for conversation. Okay. That is Robert's rules. So okay. Yeah, that's how it would be.
Okay, so that is the case. Gotcha. Yeah. And then the other question for the crisis plan on page 15, I was just curious, what does that, the implemented the delegated authorities, if the CIO is not available, I know that's in another plan, but what is that process?
We actually have we ever exercised that process? No, we haven't. We have not, but we've done tabletop exercise, and there is a series of cascading events in the absence of the CIO. It then includes a certain number of it'd be the deputy, then principals, plus the CEO, and then it cascades down ultimately to, I believe it's the board chair and McKee, or the general investment consultant. And we did a tabletop exercise in which Tim participated. But there's a whole list of what happens if in the event that the people in prior steps are unavailable.
Awesome, thank you. Appreciate that.
And that is a board-approved document.
Gotcha.
And in fact, it was that tabletop exercise that inspired me to sort of ask us the question of maybe next year as a board, it makes sense to do a tabletop exercise, a governance tabletop exercise with some of these questions. What if? So I'm hoping we can see that come back as an offsite activity.
That would be nice, especially for new trustees, coming in.
Or even old trustees.
Or old trustees, that's true. And then my final comment was simply that thinking about when I first started as a trustee, wow, the graphical that you guys put together would be something really nice that if Mr. Rice could share with incoming trustees, because it is really taking a snapshot of the document and putting it into this pictorial. And if I saw something like this when I started, then forgive me, I've forgotten, but I don't remember. But this, I think, would be something nice to share, because you're getting so much information when you first start that something like this helps put it into smaller chunks, and it has the numbers, so everybody know that we can follow the flow, the proper flow of things. So I think that this is very helpful. And again, just to finalize with, I appreciate the so much effort that went into maybe thinking about all the scenarios, especially the slide where you said, what if the CIO were to do this or that, or, running all those different scenarios and how this policy addresses that. Because, as I have indicated in the past, policies should be created based off of procedures, not on the people that are actually in the roles at the time, because that can change, from, 1 year or one period to the next. So the policy, if it's written well, as it transforms throughout the years, it hopefully addresses potential situations that will never arise now because the policy has been forward-thinking. So I appreciate all the effort and the work from staff. I think it's great.
Great. All right, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. On slide 12, page 12.
Page 12 or slide 12?
Sorry, slide 12.
Okay.
Question number 1, could a CIO exert undue influence to direct an investment to a favored asset manager? Just a correction, the last bullet, I think, is an error. The board is selected by, it should be the CIO.
Yes.
But to be clear, the committee is going to get the same, on a new investment manager recommendation, the committee is going to get the same report that the full board gets now. And that report would show all the managers that were evaluated and the associated scores, correct?
Mr. Kelly, it would depend on the nature of the search. In alignment with the board-approved procurement policy, for searches that are conducted through an RFP, that would include the scoring system.
Okay.
For private markets, the searches.
Okay, so let's assume through an RFP, the committee would get the proposers and the related scores, such that if you had proposers who had scores that were very close to one another, as we have had in the past, the undue influence to me would be that the CIO says, oh, I want the manager with the score of 90, not the manager with the score of 85. But that information is presented to the committee to engage the CIO to say, what's up here? These scores were really close. What specific factors did you consider in recommending the one firm versus another? Because this question is one of tilting. So the committee will have that information on related to RFP.
I think RFPs would be more challenging for a CIO. A CIO can exert influence if they put a favored manager into that process. The more dangerous situation is in a single is like in a private equity type of situation where we're not running RFPs, where it's a single sourced deal. The RFP process, in theory, if that manager is terrible, they're not going to score well, and that is out of the CIO's responsibility. But taking that kind of a step forward, if that were to happen, what would be the process? If, let's say, that favored manager actually makes it to the top for various reasons, would we still operate out of an abundance of caution and disclose that this was a CIO-sourced manager in an RFP context? How would that work?
Madam Chair, a couple thoughts are, first, you would still need the consultant concurrence. So I would have to have influence not only over the committee, but over a third party with a fiduciary duty to the fund. And I don't see that. I think that's unlikely. I mean,
that's an important consideration that's not listed in the control framework. It should be.
It is.
Where? That's consultants. Okay, got it.
So
we're all over it.
So I think that's part of it. And I don't know what other check per se, other than the team is independently reviewing it. Speaking as a hypothetical CIO, I think it's hard position for the CIO to say, put aside, all the analysis that's been done, put aside consultant, your opinion, we're going with X, because it's going to be reported to the board, informationally in the subsequent meeting. That strikes me as maybe not the CIO that an organization would want.
I think particularly in the RFP context, whether or not you had a favored firm, let's say you call up somebody and say you should submit to this RFP, that there are rules around how those are received. All of that needs to be complied with, and the first step is then that review. So it's already out of his hands whether he made a phone call to a favored manager or not. He's already so removed from that process in that context. I do think the danger in the private market context has been addressed, but that's where the real risk lies.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I think we have had situations where the firms submitting an RFP have had very close scores, and it's really those considerations. I want to make sure that the committee has the information to know that those scores were tight, and there was some decision made as to go with one versus the other. That's all. Thank you very much. Those are my comments.
Okay, great. All right, Mr. Santos, and then Mr. Ryu.
Yeah, I just want to compliment the staff, the tremendous work to putting all this together. At this point, I'll move approval, including the proposed changes to be included on the motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
That will be the IPS. Because at this point today, we just
wordsmith.
It's working on the IPS, and then we come back and review the other documents next month or whenever they're going to be ready.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Ryu.
Thank you. I would have seconded that too as well. I just wanted to also comment on number one. I really appreciate the Q&A session, Q&A scenarios here, and I understand what you're trying to do with number one. But at the same time, I also want to highlight that it's how the question is framed, right? Because it says, could the CIO exert undue influence on our favorite asset manager? If you phrase it in a different way, I actually would value our CIO's opinion, right? So the way it's framed here, and I understand why you framed it this way, to prevent any negative, any potential, bad CIO trying to stir us in the wrong way. But it could, we hired our CIO because we trust our CIO, and I would want, and actually, like, for example, the CIO sourced investment opportunities, obviously he would bring it to us because of various reasons.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily the asset manager. Maybe this asset manager's spectacular, or maybe there's something about it, and I would like, especially in those close scoring scenarios, where I would want our CIO's opinion, right? So I would, in a positive way, I think the CIO exerting his influence is a good thing. I mean, and clearly, if we don't have faith in our CIO, that's when we get a new CIO.
Yeah,
right?
and I think it's more of a plan for the best and hope for the best and plan for the worst.
Right.
So this sort of plans for the bad actor, but obviously if the CIO brings a great idea, we have the authority to approve it.
So I just wanted to comment that, I don't want our CIO to be so removed where, he or in the future she feels constraint, right? Because actually we hired our CIO based on his strength and what his knowledge is, and we want him to let us know that. So
Such a great point.
yeah.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second.
Mr. Green?
Just one.
Oh, wait.
I think this is an important clarification before you move anything to a vote.
Sure. So, Ms. Chair, if I may, one consideration for the board is that we think that the framework can be implemented both with the red lines as presented in the two editions, but also rescinding the board's powers defined and powers reserved policies, which, as this IPS draws the key roles into the IPS.
You're saying leave it as two separate policies?
Rescinding the powers defined policy and the powers reserved policy.
In order
so the
to
motion
keep
would
from-
be adopting the IPS as revised and rescinding the powers reserved and powers
So we don't
defined
have to keep them in alignment?
Yeah.
I see.
Basically,
Okay,
Rescinding
so
or retiring or.
are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this IPS supersedes
Right.
any previous
This IPS will take the place
rights
of,
reserved to the board.
yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So do you accept that?
Yeah.
As a motion maker, as a
you're
second?
comfortable.
Do you accept that? So effectively, we're going to do away with the rights reserved and I can't remember, such a long, with that second policy, so we don't have to keep them aligned. So now all of it will be in one
And
policy.
the IPS.
So the
And we
IPS.
did a thorough double check on making sure that everything that was
Transferred.
covered in those documents fully transferred. So I feel very comfortable with the work that was done on integrating that into the IPS.
Right, so the motion then is, I move the revised IPS, including the two changes made, and this IPS supersedes any other document in conflict with this policy.
No, we have.
I
No,
think it's
actually,
just a
we're just,
retired.
we're just
Okay,
retiring the powers reserved and powers defined
We have
policies.
to retire those. Yeah.
Retire, sure.
Okay, that is the
Thank you.
motion.
Okay.
And just for a point of clarification, we're gonna have one more look at this, correct?
No, this is the look.
This is the.
It will come back as a report next, so you'll still be able to look at it and pull it from reports or whatever if.
But we'll be able to vet the clean draft after it's done, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and
Technically, we're approving it now, and we would see the clean draft next month. Is that fair?
That's fair, and I would say the policy as about to be updated and possibly voted on allows the board to review the IPS at any period of time, so if
Yeah,
that red line.
exactly.
so-
We can make any
Yeah.
tweaks if we see a
Absolutely.
comma, an Oxford comma. I hate Oxford commas.
I'm good with the second.
Great. All right. We have a motion. We have a second.
Mr. Green? Jason Green?
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. David Green?
Aye.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, with that, I think we can take a break before our climate aware strategic policy. So it is 10:58. Let's return at 11:10. It's 12 minutes.
Recording stopped.
Thank you for
Yeah,
your
we're
help on this.
Come at the last minute.
Got to bring in the big guns.
Recording in progress.
Uncouth if we're eating while
this is the
meeting.
stuff, so this is.
Oh, did you already go get your food? Oh, damn, I should have done that. Oh, well. Hello. Hello. All right. So moving on. Our next item is item B, the Climate Aware Strategic Asset Allocation. And so we have our team here. So Scott or
Great.
Dale?
Yes, great. Thank you,
Mr. Drazel.
Mr. Chair. I'll kick it off. So good morning again. Report 8B, as part of the board's strategic asset allocation study. This report discusses how LACERA is assessing and measuring investment risks as well as opportunities related to climate change and the evolving energy transition. This is an update similar to a report that was provided to the board in 2020 in advance of the last strategic asset allocation decision in 2021, and will present both currently known exposures as well as modeling that Makita will use to stress test the strategic asset allocation options for the board to consider in advance of its decision in the coming months. So let's move to slide 3. We wanted to state some of the key themes up front on this presentation of what Dale and the Makita team will go over. They include, first, notably that data analytics illustrate that the energy transition and climate change are shaping investment risks and rewards, and fundamentally can impact the financial returns for LACERA as well as our ability to meet our mission. Second, the current measurable climate risks in the current portfolio are concentrated in a small number of allocations and portfolios as well as companies. Third, the fund is gaining exposure to energy transition opportunities. That's both as a result of intentional portfolio positioning, as well as from portfolio companies modifying their business strategies in real time. A fourth theme is that portfolio positioning can influence outcomes with more upside opportunities in some asset classes and more anticipated volatility in others to be aware of. And lastly, that by using available data to conduct modeling, climate analytics can provide an additional lens of analysis to inform the board's upcoming strategic asset allocation decision. On slide 4, we highlight that LACERA's approach to climate risks is really guided by fund policy, which states that climate change and the energy transition can present both financial risks as well as opportunities at individual portfolio companies, as well as to the broader economy in which LACERA is invested as a diversified long-term investor. We've approached climate risk through a number of strategies. We identify across the bottom, including some of our proxy voting and corporate engagement initiatives discussed at the Corporate Governance Committee last month, but also by using increasingly available data to model what we can and evolve as some of those modeling opportunities improve over time. So we'll take a deeper dive on that analytics side throughout the whole presentation, but also up front on slide 5, that in recent years we've discussed as part of our strategic plan to pursue a climate-aware asset allocation, which raises the question, what do we mean when we say climate-aware? We use climate-aware to refer to actively identifying and evaluating risks and investment opportunities related to climate change, and then to use that information to inform investment decisions on multiple levels, including the strategic asset allocation, which Makita will go over, as well as structure reviews on subcategory allocations and ranges, as well as the team's due diligence of individual managers and their investment processes. We cite here that traditional SAA modeling uses past performance to try to predict the future returns in every asset class. We do recognize that by using past performance, such modeling might be challenged to identify future exogenous risks, like geopolitical strife. that can shape global markets, or the COVID-19 pandemic that impacts workforces, supply chains, and consumer spending habits, to just list a few. So to try to identify and assess future climate risks, this presentation is covering assessing the current portfolio by using carbon intensity on that bottom left corner to measure areas of concentrated exposure, and as well as using scenario analysis on the current exposures to evaluate how the current portfolio could be impacted by climate-related policy changes, weather-related factors, as well as technological innovations. And then we'll have Makita highlight some of their updated modeling, which will stress test capital market assumptions for climate risks and opportunities that, again, will be updated in advance of the board's SA deliberation. Slide 6 is a quick caution and note.
Madam Chair, if I may, before
Yeah.
you move on, just you answered some of my questions, like how has the modeling changed? The bullet point, the fourth bullet point in the second paragraph, it said Makita's work started in the year 2000 to develop modeling to help inform the board's 2020 strategic plan. Is that a typo?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Green. The 2021 board decision was voted on in 2021. There were preceding months of board presentations and discussions, so the climate analysis was presented in 2021 in advance of that vote.
But it says LACERA first
2020,
worked with Makita
yes.
in the year 2000.
Yes, you're correct. That should read 2020.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Kind of
Regret the typo.
That's a heck of a data pool if that's the case. All right, thank you for that. And I look forward, that was my second question. How's the modeling changed? But it sounds like it's going to be addressed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the question, and I regret the typo there. Slide 6 is a quick note and caution on the available data. To your observation, data is improving, but it's not perfect yet. We're not trying to have perfect be the enemy of the good. Use what we can. As Dale will go over in discussing the current portfolio, we note that we currently have data coverage for about 54% of the portfolio. That's mostly coming from a vendor we've procured that covers publicly listed companies. But we're increasingly getting reporting from private asset class managers, and the board's affiliation with the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, or GRESB, is facilitating more reporting from our real estate managers to cover some climate exposures.
I have a question on that. I understand the benchmark for GRESB with the 6% of the real estate. They kind of set the bar, so to speak. But what's the industry metric for the other? I know there's some MSCI and other places like that. But what is the metric what is the bar that we're setting with these other indexes? If you can elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, and I might defer when we get to the next slide. Dale will talk about which identifiable benchmarks we've used. Some of LACERA's benchmarks are composites for which climate data is not readily available. So we've tried to identify appropriate reference points through available information. And Dale can speak to that specifically on that.
And Makita's using a similar process.
Yeah, our process is going to be a little bit different. Just the lens that we're looking through it is more 30,000 foot from the strategic asset allocation level down. And maybe just to sort of elaborate on what Scott said there, the data is evolving. There's no real gold standard or industry standard best practice. This is whether it's from the bottom up or the top down. Something that's still quite honestly nascent in the journey of integrating this information into portfolio analytics and identifying risks and opportunities. So I think we just need to keep that in mind as we're addressing it. There is no standard approach. There are probably 20 different ESG data providers at this point in time. I think we have to measure each of them carefully and recognize that every data set we use, whether it's a Makita data set or an external provider's, is going to have certain gaps and flaws. And so we have to acknowledge that is an important component of this. There's a lot of uncertainty, even around the data, never mind around like the scenarios and the future possibilities here.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, I would also add to that this is not only evolving, but in some ways we are a leader in this. So I think there are some plans that are looking to see how we do it as well. One quick question on this sort of things that we don't know or that we cannot that we can't do. We don't have any kind of benchmark or information on. Some of it is, it says here, hedge funds. Are they just not equity hedge funds, meaning we can't just work off a 13F or something like that?
Yeah, a lot of them is we don't have clear look through into the hedge funds, so we don't know what the underlying investments are.
Right.
And they turn over quite a bit. So, to this extent that some of them are tactical or use synthetic instruments, we're not going to be able to measure that or model.
Got it. Okay, great. Moving on.
Great. So just mentioned we are modeling some exposures to the extent that we can get information for underlying financial inputs. So that's about 5% of the information we now have, and we'll continue to try to expand that going forward. So we do see more private market managers developing capacity, and that's part of our upfront due diligence as well as the monitoring. So let me turn it over to Dale to walk through some insights on the current portfolio.
So thank you, Scott. Good morning, Madam Chair and trustees. On slide 7, we provide a snapshot of LACERA's current measurable carbon intensity and demonstrates that the measurable portfolio is above a referenced benchmark across several metrics. I'll get more into this in a little bit. The bar chart on the left side shows 3 carbon footprint related snapshots in time of LACERA's portfolio. And beginning and looking at the far left one, the first set of bars indicates that, for example, the total fund has a weighted average carbon intensity of 308 compared to 151 for the MSCI ACWI IMI index. So first, the weighted average carbon intensity measures a company's scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions divided by its revenues times its weight in the portfolio. So this 308 also includes additional private markets, modeled securities, as Scott referenced in the previous slide. And for the benchmark, we're showing the MSCI All Country World Investable Market Index as a reference point because it is a broad global equity benchmark, and we cannot calculate the carbon footprint on our total fund benchmark because it is a composite of performance benchmarks for which climate data is not readily available. So we're trying to use publicly available benchmarks where we have company exposures that we can measure the emissions and make estimates. So that's why we're using the ACWI, which is a broad investable index.
Right.
The line graph on the right shows the trend line of LACERA's public markets portfolio. So that's equities and fixed income in multiple asset classes. It shows the carbon intensity over the past 4 years, and which has been steadily increasing and above the ACWI IMI index, which is again just for a reference point. It's not representative of the public markets, which is being represented here to a great extent. I'll get into the divergence on the next slide. So on slide 8, the top middle chart shows that LACERA's higher carbon intensity is driven by several areas of carbon intensity in the portfolio, including the real assets public markets completion portfolios, the high yield composite, and a non-US public equity portfolio. It should be noted that the 2 real assets WDS portfolios are being drawn as LACERA makes commitments to private infrastructure and natural resources funds, and which, as we'll show later, having increasing exposure to energy transition opportunities. The charts on the bottom of the slide show that the 3 sectors, materials, utilities, and energies, account for over 3/4 of LACERA's Scope 1 and 2 carbon intensity, and only 50 companies represent over half of that carbon intensity. Notably, these are the same companies and sectors that are a focus of LACERA's engagement with the Climate Action 100 initiative to engage the most intensive carbon in companies to reduce and mitigate climate-related risks.
Interesting.
The next slide focuses on...
If I have a quick question, on slide 7, the chart on the right, if you overlaid our fund growth, would that correlate with the the increase or comparatively if you overlaid asset reallocation? What is that? Is there?
We'll get to that in a later
Okay.
slide if you don't.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
It's more on allocation than it is on asset growth, using this measure of carbon intensity. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so moving, thank you, Cindy, I think is running slides. The next slide focuses on scenario analysis to evaluate the potential financial impact of climate-related risks on LACERA's portfolio. Climate value at risk evaluates the prospective impacts of policy and regulatory, also known as transition risks, physical risks, and technology opportunities on future value of companies in the portfolio. Using the Network for Greening the Financial System's less than 2 degree scenario, there is a potential for a 15% value drawdown on LACERA's portfolio. The chart in the middle of the slide breaks down the impacts of each of the three scenario components. The largest potential impact on financial value is from physical risks, but I will discuss that in a moment in the next slide. Staying here, the other potential financial drawdown is from companies that may be impacted by policy or regulatory shifts, such as carbon taxes or increased efficiency requirements that could face steeper costs in the long run unless they transition their energy sources or operations in a timely manner. The aggregate financial impact on valuations of these companies is about 4% in LACERA's portfolio, over 4% in LACERA's portfolio. Go ahead.
Can I make a quick question? So that big potential physical drawdown, is it also reasonable to say that that's also being driven by the same 50 companies?
No.
No?
And
Okay.
we'll get into that in the next slide.
Okay, thanks.
Finally, the graph estimates that LACERA may gain from portfolio holdings that develop and implement technological innovation that will benefit from the transition and could provide positive value impact to the fund. So moving on to slide 10, here we break down the current estimated financial impact of the physical risks, such as direct impacts to a company's operations and infrastructure from extreme weather events or shifts in changing weather patterns. 2 of the 10 physical risk factors, extreme heat and coastal flooding, together have a combined estimated 11% financial value impact on companies in the current portfolio. Extreme heat would impact companies that involve physical labor or take place outside, such as agriculture, environmental goods and services, and construction. Coastal flooding, which is driven by sea level rise, has financial loss potential as asset values and economic activity are typically concentrated in areas with increasing urbanization and expansive economic growth. So it's generally not going to be the same companies that are necessarily going to be impacted by regulatory risks. It's more infrastructure and operations related as those companies, and even financial institutions and technology companies, which are more likely to be located in the coast. So it's not going to necessarily be more intensive carbon companies.
Got it.
Moving on to slide 11, we show the carbon intensity and climate value at risk estimates have shifted in the portfolio over the last 7 years, to your question, Trustee Green. These shifts are largely due to structural changes in implementation decisions across the fund, and as noted here, demonstrate that portfolio construction can impact the fund's climate risk profile. As noted in the examples on the bottom right of the slide, asset-specific allocation guidelines set out in structure views can shape the total fund's climate profile. Moving on to slide 13, moving on to slide 12, we highlight that the fund is beginning to gain more exposure to energy transition-related investment opportunities. These exposures are a result of both the fund making intentional investment decisions, as well as portfolio companies evolving their business strategies in real time. For example, as noted here, the fund has made over $3 billion in commitments to infrastructure and natural resource private funds that are anticipated to have exposures to renewables, including 2 dedicated clean energy funds. This follows the board-approved structure review and real assets, avoiding long-dated exposures to several sectors where there can be a risk of higher volatility and write-downs or stranded assets. Companies in our own portfolio are evolving. Data analytics indicate that about 15% of LACERA's portfolio are starting to generate revenue from energy transition opportunities. Notably, this includes some of the most carbon-intensive portfolio holdings, as indicated that the companies such as utilities transition their energy mix. LACERA's portfolio carbon intensity exposure to new opportunities is evolving also. We highlight that several of these companies are also being engaged by the Climate Action 100+ initiative, which LACERA participates to encourage companies to assess and pursue emerging energy transitions. So I'll turn it over to Tim.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you very much, Dale. I'm not going to take much time here because I think we've covered some of this, but just want to highlight that while there is a tremendous amount of data available at the holdings level, that's still evolving as a tool for analyzing the portfolio. In our role in advising you on the next strategic asset allocation, we also think it's important to consider these risks at the asset category level and overall at the strategic asset allocation mix level. It's a little more complicated there. The data is not as good, so we've had to design our own tools essentially to do this work. And now there are some others which we're going to be including the NGFS data and scenarios into our analysis. But I brought with me an expert today, so I can pass this one off to Zach Stevens, who's one of our senior quantitative analysts and works on the team that not only does our capital markets expectations, but has also developed our approach to modeling climate in conjunction with Scott and his team the last time we did the asset allocation. And he's going to talk about how those have changed and how we're utilizing those tools on your behalf.
Great. Thanks, Zach.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. And so on slide 13, I just want to kind of reiterate the point here of what we're trying to accomplish, and that is to give you all a broad set of information on how various asset classes are impacted over the long term across a broad set of different climate risk scenarios. We're very aware that there is an incredible amount of uncertainty in just what different scenarios could play out. And so we tried to take a simulation-based approach to be able to give you all a broad range of outcomes and how the mean point estimate is impacted, as well as various opportunities sets that could be in the data going forward, as they've Dale and Scott have talked about in the transition that we're all currently going through. Before I jump into the 4 scenarios that Makita has developed and stress test, and I should note that these scenarios came about in working closely with LACERA and other clients, as well as what we are primarily seeing in media and what international organizations are mostly concerned about. And so that is, kind of how we chose to focus on these 4. But just to give a baseline of where we sit today, we currently sit at about 1.1 to 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial averages, which is a global temperature-wise, which is measured as the global average temperature between 1850 and 1900. So when we're kind of talking about these set of scenarios, I think that's just helpful background of where we currently are at the moment. However, 2023 is turning out to be a rather warm year, and certain data is pointing to the fact that we may be hitting at least a current point of around 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial average, which is an interesting point and starting point for a lot of this analysis. So digging into these 4 scenarios, our first that we're going to be looking at is a 1.5 degree Celsius mean above pre-industrial averages. And so what we're going to be looking at here is simulations that are consistent with that specific scenario. Staying within this level of temperature rise, as you can all imagine based upon where we sit today, is going to require some pretty aggressive mitigation efforts to really accomplish. On the next is going to be the 3 degree above pre-industrial average, 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial average, all by 2100. This level of temperature rise is more considerate with relatively moderate climate change mitigation efforts, and it's far more consistent with the status quo of the trajectory that we are on today. Following that is the 3% carbon reduction scenario, and what this is measuring is a 3% annual reduction in carbon intensity of electricity production globally, and we'll be kind of digging into that one a little bit more. And finally is a $100 carbon tax policy. And so this is consistent with a $100 per metric ton of CO2 produced carbon tax implemented across the broader energy sector, where we see effectively fossil fuel reserve owners having to increase prices and take on that cost while not being able to bear any additional profits. On the next slide, we kind of can dig into a little bit of how does this Makita model actually work, because that is a little bit complex. As we were kind of talking about, the data here is somewhat imperfect and constantly adapting and changing in how we're trying to measure this. So to accomplish this effort, Makita takes greater than 50 different macroeconomic, market, climate variables into account, where we first find the historical relationships amongst them, either direct or indirect, as you can see by this incredibly somewhat messy charts, just in that it is highlighting just how interconnected all of these different variables are, whether that be on how CO2 emissions could be affecting oil prices, and even things like interest rates and its effects on GDP. All of this does get baked into the model.
Are you using a network model here?
In this specific instance, that's what we're emphasizing. Yes. From there, we're able to then, based on finding the historical relationships amongst the factors, as well as amongst 104 different asset classes that we all model, we're able to then project out 30 years into the future, 10,000 simulations to give kind of that really healthy dose of uncertainty around this point and what the world could look like. And that's, I think, the main takeaway here is each one of these simulations is a way that the world could look. And finally, to how we actually go about analyzing these different scenarios and stress testing the portfolio, or stress testing different asset classes, is we can then take a subset of those simulations. So if we start with 10,000 and we want to say look at a scenario that's consistent with a 3-degree rise above pre-industrial average, we can find the subset of simulations that are consistent with that scenario, and then we can analyze the distribution of data that comes out of that specific scenario. On the next slide, we can just finally kind of jump into our first scenario, which is the 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial average. And I'd just like to take a moment here to hopefully clarify on how you actually go about reading these box plots. And so each box plot is showing the middle 50% of simulations output, looking at a 20-year annualized return. The boxes above and below, given their size, shows the variation of data and potential opportunities or downside risk associated with each asset class in their scenario.
Just a quick question, is the first box plot your current estimation for the long-term capital market assumption, and the second one is what happens under the scenario, is that right?
Yep, exactly. So in the green-blue box plot, that is just our Makita's fundamentally driven capital market assumption return and standard deviation. The orange dot indicates the average return, while the middle line there indicates the median return. We call out there the average return, while the light gray and dark gray boxes are the accompanying stressed scenario of that. And as you can see, in most of these cases, we're getting expanding distributions of data in kind of each of these scenarios.
Okay, Mr. Knox, do you want to ask your question now? At the end. At the end, okay.
And so across this whole scenario of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial average, which again, I'll reiterate, is a relatively trying transition risk scenario. As you can imagine, it's going to require some pretty immediate and swift policies that would be required to be able to achieve that. And so that's where we're going to be kind of getting the majority of our, at the average, negative, impact to the average returns. However, I'd like to again emphasize here that the point of this analysis is the average returns are going to be based largely on, and the downside of those historical returns is going to be based on historical relationships and how maybe those assets are today. But as I think Scott and Dale pointed out, many of these companies and many of these asset classes have transitioning funds within them that are going to be able to take into account opportunities that we don't necessarily maybe have today, and kind of further into the future through implementation from managers at the fund level. We can see outsized performance.
Can I just ask a quick question right on this slide? So my understanding is in terms of how you explain the scenario, is that we are roughly at about 1.2 degrees Celsius now. So this is more or less actually potentially arresting the momentum that we are on, meaning that we would not get worse or not get much worse in this scenario. And in that scenario, you're projecting a hit to most of the asset classes. How does that differ from your base case in terms of what your actual global equity, your global, I should use that as an example, global equity of 9.2% and 8.86, assuming we arrested the kind of momentum that we're on in terms of increased temperature deviation. What's built into that 9.2 that mitigates the risk we seem to be on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so we don't necessarily build in a specific climate. We don't build in an explicit target, which in which we think where we're currently headed. I think the distribution of data and climate scientists will differ on exactly what that number is. However, I will say the model projects, given that's based upon historical data and the momentum that it kind of currently has, is around 2.2 to 2.3 degrees. And so that is, so we're talking about a 0.7, 0.8 degree difference, or basically mitigation effort required to be able to kind of achieve that target.
Okay, but right now, the 9.2 or whatever it is that your kind of current long-term capital market assumption doesn't have any specific scenarios built into it.
No, it does not.
Okay.
It's you can kind of think of it as the full set of any possible
Of all
ways
risks
the
possible.
world could look.
Got
yes.
it. Okay.
And to add on to that, Ms. Chair, that's why we think it might be helpful to do this exercise, to add it as an additional lens of possible impacts.
Yeah, I mean, because certainly it seems like if this is potentially what the status quo is, and recognizing that the data is imperfect and we're kind of throwing a dart here, that at the very least you think it would be a little worse than we would be a little worse off, and that's just assuming that we can stop the problem. And the next scenario is that we keep going on the trajectory that we're going, and we get it's actually not as big a hit.
Yeah, so moving on
that
to
one's more the status quo model. The 1.5 I would call an emergency brake scenario, almost in a way.
Okay.
You can't stop the train right away, but you're gonna do your best, and the other one's more status quo.
Yeah,
I see.
that's perfectly
Got it.
fair. So
Okay.
maybe we can jump to the 3-degree scenario there on slide 16. And so what this again is measuring, right, a 3-degree Celsius rise above the pre-industrial average. And what you end up kind of seeing across this whole scenario is your movement away from transition risk in the portfolio or in these specific asset classes, and you're starting to become impacted much more by potential physical risks. And so often we think about that as in terms of wildfires and how that might decimate current real estate or forests or major flooding. However, there's kind of it can be a bit more nuanced in that you can see companies writing down the value of certain companies or maybe timberland that has a greater potential risk to maybe those wildfires, to those earthquakes that could potentially kind of become more frequent or more severe in this 3-degree scenario. And so obviously just kind of pointing out, one specific, natural resources ends up becoming one of the most heavily impacted here, such that you primarily based on a lot of its energy exposure, we see that could have a pretty significant downturn. However, again, the distribution here does widen, bringing out a new set of potential opportunities, kind of in this scenario. Another reason we may be seeing a slightly less severe impact is that we are currently looking at 20 years here. While in the next 20 years, there's certainly a chance that physical risks become more significant. The likelihood is that by 2100, that it's going to become far more of an issue that people are modeling in than it is in just while the investment long term might be 20 years, as far as global temperature goes, 20 years is not too far out.
Yeah, and we're just trying to marry those two things for, analytical integrity.
Yeah.
We're recommending the strategic asset allocation based on 10 and 20-year data sets. So going out to 50 or 100 just isn't informative to that process.
Yep, absolutely. Moving on to slide 17. Here we can focus on, this is the scenario in which you see a 3% reduction in carbon intensity of electricity production annually for the next 10 years. So this is we're basically modeling out a rather swift shift from carbon intensive electricity production, such as natural gas, coal, etc., and really forcing the hand of moving towards wind, solar, hydro, etc. So most of these assets end up becoming relatively stressed under this environment, including obviously in natural resources due to just the shift away from more traditional energy assets or more traditional energy. However, we do see the scenario ends up being somewhat consistent with that of a stagflationary environment, with a moderate rise in the investment grade bonds category, as well as just additional upside there, as well as if you look at liquid credit, you see a relatively flat outcome with very minimal impact as far as the variance in expected returns goes. And finally, I will move on to the final scenario, talking through a potential carbon tax. And so
on the next slide, if you could.
Yes, please. The carbon tax scenario, again, is a $100 per metric ton of CO2 carbon tax implemented across the entire energy sector, or globally, really. To kind of put this into maybe a more understandable terms, this would be equivalent to increasing the price of oil per barrel by $40 immediately. And that would remain consistent over the next decade. So as you can imagine, this becomes a very, very stressed scenario as across basically every single asset class is hit significantly, such as, of course, natural resources and most real assets here, seeing a negative downturn at their average. Again, however, this does potentially lead to probably less opportunities, less potential opportunities. However, just given the shift of the boxes, however, this still does lead to some interesting energy transition opportunities that are available. All right, moving on to slide 19. We'll be talking through a little bit of the NGFS scenarios. And so as obviously this has become more of a concern across asset owners and the broader community, a pretty large group of central banks and financial supervisors, economists, and climate scientists have taken it upon themselves to produce a 6 potential scenarios and provided more prescriptive data sets for a broad set of factors. And this organization is called the Network for Greening Financial Systems, or as you'll see, it's kind of the NGFS for short here, and you'll hear me refer to that probably a couple of times. So our approach to this is very similar to how we go about modeling out the rest of the distributions, taking a simulation-based approach. However, where we differ here is that given that they provide more prescriptive outcomes of many different variables, we are actually able to then hold those constant or plug those into our set of forecasts, and we do that across 11 variables, that including, as you can see there in the middle point, GDP, various energy prices, consumptions, as well as we're now able to more easily model out explicit physical risks, such as the cost due to increased river flooding, floods, as well as increased tropical storm costs. They lay out 6 relatively unique scenarios. However, we can kind of break them down into 3 broader categories. Orderly, which is the top 2 there, which looks at assuming a relatively smooth transition towards more strict climate policies and mitigating a chance of high temperature rise. Disorderly, which moves towards and assumes that sectors, countries are not necessarily working cohesively, and that there's going to be a somewhat fragmented approach to how we get to mitigating climate change and achieving maybe a net zero target. And finally, the hothouse scenario, or hothouse category, which looks at...
Are we tomatoes in that scenario?
Hothouse, which basically looks at if we were to maintain status quo or maybe slight mitigation efforts. Slight mitigation efforts across the portfolio, leading to high fiscal risks. And on my final slide here, on slide 20, we're just showing a table of Makita baseline capital markets assumptions based on our fundamental modeling relative to, and these are the deltas against the point estimates here. So most scenarios, as you'll kind of see, particularly in the NGFS, are somewhat negative, as NGFS basically is modeling out, negative outcomes and high transition costs and impacts of climate change. And then finally, though, we do see that there is potential upside across certain scenarios where we maintain status quo, primarily in equities, as well as in certain scenarios where there is a delayed transition, as the transition cost ends up becoming the primary driver of negative equity returns. And I will turn it back over to Scott, maybe for final points.
Okay. Mr. Knox, do you want to have your question now or after?
Still waiting.
Okay, still waiting.
Yeah,
You're so
hold on.
patient.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Drazel.
Sure. So I'll just maybe reiterate that this isn't an exact analysis. It's using numbers as with a lot of assumptions upon some assumptions. But what we observe is that there can be impacts depends on what scenario plays out. And those impacts have wider variability in some asset classes than others. So as a next step, what we intended to do with Makita is that when options for the board's strategic asset allocation come up, they'll rerun the stress testing so that the board can take into consideration potential impacts on that variability. And then other implications are how each asset class structures its portfolio, any shifts going forward. So the next steps are really summarized here as really that stress testing exercise, and we'll continue to fold in available data and presentations to the board as useful, and monitoring of individual asset managers' portfolios. So happy to take any questions.
All right, we have Mr. Knox and then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I agree. It's nice at least seeing some assumptions and starting to wrap at least my head around what some of these scenarios would look like. I mean, nothing really brought it home other than visiting, Tokyo for PPI, which I was fortunate to be able to do, and being on an island nation, talking a lot about climate risk. They're already subject and prone to natural disasters. They had man-made disasters with Fukushima. They have the expansion of Arctic exploration with some of their neighbors like Russia, which can, create the potential for opportunity financially, but also, environmental damage that's significant. They talked about their growing seasons changing, impact on agricultural production, and all these other factors. And then they still throw in, even though they're trying to develop all this green technology, it's still heavily dependent on coal and other things to drive those. So this really resonated, and it was especially helpful coming on the heels of that conference. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. So I'm very pessimistic in this space, partly because of my conversations with members of my family. I have a very large family, including a large number of great nieces and great nephews in kind of the 18 to 22-year-old range. And when I talk to them about climate change, they make statements to me like, well, I would really have to consider having children. And that's really significant. There's kind of a somber mood to conversations with them about the future, specifically related to climate change. And I do what I can. I got an electric motorcycle, and I check that box in the UPS form that says you want to contribute more to fight climate change. And I take low cost or low carbon emission flights from Google flights. But the fact is, the world is on fire, and I think our individual and collective heads are in the sand. And I think there's not a fun future ahead for me with climate change. I think we have to take much more drastic action, much more quickly, which would have a significant impact on the way we lead our individual and collective lives. And I think eventually it'll turn out in the numbers. But I don't have a positive view on where we are or where we're going. And I just wanted to share that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Yu?
Slides 15 to 18, if I could get the slides right. So basically, like slide 15, the orange dot is where LACERA is? Would be the projection is, the returns?
That is the projection of, that's the average.
For the market economy?
Yes, in the box that is the blue and green box, that is of the Makita's fundamentally driven capital market assumption, 20-year assumption, while in the light gray and dark gray box, that orange point or that average there is that of the impact of the scenario.
Okay, so if the climate rate rises by 1.5, this is what you predict. Makita predicts the world economy would be, right? Finance economy, or returns for these various categories would be, right?
Yes, at the average.
And then at 3%, it'll be the other one, the chart 16, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Do we have an analysis of our current? I don't know if you're contract to do this, but our current portfolio, where our current portfolio stands and all of how we contribute to 1.5 or 3%? Our investments?
Whole different
Yeah,
scenario.
it's a whole
different
How you
analysis.
contribute to it, but we are able to run these scenarios now based on your current portfolio, and we could show you how the spot estimates of what we would expect the portfolio to do over a 10 or 20-year period would potentially change, and that's exactly what we'll be showing.
Those are two very different analyses.
Yeah.
The question
But
here
not how
is
you
how much
contribute
do we
to-
contribute to the current,
Or our investments.
Yeah,
right?
how
Or
much do our investments
Which is a whole nother, I understand, a can of worms. And just food for thought, I like to put it out there. That would be interesting to look at. And again, I don't even know where you start or how you would start it, but to see our investments, if our investments contribute towards the 1.5 world or the 2 or the 3% world, or which world, right? And clearly, obviously, it has an implication of are we looking for pure high returns, or are we willing to sacrifice returns for some less carbon footprint, right? So I don't even think there's any indicators that exist, and I know everyone's trying to argue and fight for what indicators are the correct indicators to even begin with, but that would be something that would be of interest, and I don't even know which way to approach that, but that would be interesting to look at.
So, Mr. Rue, I can chime in that on slide 9, there's some analysis of the current portfolio and potential, impacts on the portfolio, demonstrating, mostly a write down here. We are receiving from procured external debt vendors to what extent companies in the portfolio, largely public market companies, already have business strategies aligned to a 1.5 or 2 degree. We're working through that data, making sure we're comfortable with reliability and so forth. But going forward, we can fold in some of those insights into discussions like this as well.
And also for the record, that's obviously the more narrow you are, the better you could do measurements. But then to make it even more complex, then that doesn't take into account where we could reduce the carbon footprint, but it could cause, as Trustee Knox said, create different implications, right? We could go nuclear, but that'll cause a whole nother potential problem while we're helping climate, right? Or mining for batteries, right? It's a whole different type of resources that we're extrapolating from. So yeah, I know nothing is perfect, but it would be interesting to see that, because that way we could, for the future, when we come up with our investment decisions, we could kind of incorporate. I know this is all part of the version of ESG, but it would be good to have that data.
Yeah, and I would add that a lot of this information is buried in the supply chain, which makes it even harder, and often in a different geography. We tend to outsource our our pollution as a country, sadly.
Yeah.
Sure. Again, on certain asset categories, there's upside written here, investment opportunity. If we go to slide 12, we're beginning to see some insights on known exposures, and the real assets team, in conjunction with Alborn, is tracking some of those exposures.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gaining more and more insight that we can fold into future discussion as well.
Great. All right, Mr. Green.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. This data mining and everything. It's a lot. I agree with the chair's point about LACERA being, a leader in this, and it was, I love a good fight, and I've spoke to this before, but at the, when I was at Wharton, there was other fund managers that were calling us out, challenging us basically that, how we're shirking our fiduciary responsibility by, putting this DEI problem in front of the bottom line, so to speak. And it's so short-sighted. I want Mr. Santos to sleep good at night, knowing that, there's not going to be a famine migration because of exceptional drought. And again, thanks for the data stuff. I find that this is weighted heavily on environmental stuff. And under our policy, the corporate governance principles, we have the social factors too. And I don't know if it's possible, but I would like to see,
Social.
you know, that kind of human thing. I know it's been folded into some other analyses, but you know, war, you know, like I said, famine, migration, pandemic, you know, not necessarily human capital of the company, but what's it going to look like when there's an, you know, this 1.5 degree change or potential 2 change when, you know, you talk about Japan, most of the flat land in Japan is either used for food growing or habitation. So when you have a 3 or 4 meter sea rise, or the coast of California or Florida, for example, you're going to have a huge upset in the financial markets, you know, in any country. That is social issue of this, you know. I don't know if there's a way to overlay that, but I think there's a direct correlation between one and the other, and what's that going to look like? You know, I don't know necessarily what services Florida provides, but using Florida as an example, if half of it's underwater, you know, it's going to tax the infrastructure. It's going to tax things to something I don't think we can really fathom unless we take a deep dive look at it. So
And I think maybe one of the tools that we already use, but we hid in this analysis, is a lot of this is based on 10,000 scenarios that, you know, clearly incorporate a lot of interconnected variables. So some of those are captured, but we eliminated like 50% of them because otherwise these charts have these tails that go really wide.
And even in my notes, Tim, I put that in there. I know for the sake of communication but I don't know. Maybe that 50% of fat that's cut out somewhere, there's some other significant ones outside of environment or the direct impact of these environmental things.
And to be fair, I think we do have at least fiscal impact modeled in there, because I heard you mention that in a few cases, but certainly social migration, resulting climate-related migration is that also taken into account, or would that be another layer of analysis?
That's something that we haven't explicitly modeled out here. Implicitly, it may or may not be already kind of captured in this. It is not a specific variable, I will say. But, you know, that may certainly kind of be in the data and something that we can extract out as we've used, you know, this broad set of simulations. It captures a lot of different environments, including things of such like deglobalization and major wars, as we've modeled those for other clients in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I understand the fiscal identifying for natural resources, but also the impact of limited natural resources. You know, I mean, the ability to create energy, whether clean or not, but what happens when there's no clean water? You know, those kind of things. You know, so anyway, it just I don't want to burden it too much, but you know, I think it does have relevance.
Resource security, certainly,
you know, for the sustainability of our fund. I mean, if we and the globalization, if we do have some investment heavily weighted or even moderately weighted, and it goes to pot, so to speak, how can we? I mean, and like Mr. Grable said, there's no crystal ball. We can't predict the next, but some of these things should have analysis. Chance favors a prepared mind, and if we can have an idea of it, maybe that might give us some agility moving into the future when we are all gone in 2050 or 2024. Thank you. Yeah,
Did you just
great presentation.
Retire us or kill us?
I guess my last question, is it possible to fold that in?
It's a potential, yes, that we could include that.
All right. Thoughts for future analysis, Mr. Santos?
Yes, very.
interesting discussion. Thank you for the presentation. It's great. But I also fear for my grandchildren. What kind of world are we living for them? But at the same time, I think about my duty here, which is to maximize returns, because we have to pay those benefits no matter what. And so that's the dilemma that I have had over the years, that you have some groups advocating for divesting, for example, fossil fuel. Well, that's great, but fossil fuel still give us an opportunity to get good returns in order to meet the 7%. So that's what makes it very difficult on this board, at least for me over the years, because I am concerned, but I want to make sure that we fulfill our obligation to the members. Remember the people that we honor in the morning? That's what we're here for. So we cannot sacrifice returns. So I believe that the program and the system that LACERA has set out is getting us to where we are comfortable, at least in my view, is that we do get the returns that we need. We look at this information, we take it into account, but that cannot be the sole guiding principle for us. Other pension funds in this state are mandated, or at least they have legislation in Sacramento that is going to force CalPERS and CalSTRS to divest. Luckily, it doesn't apply to LACERA, but those are the issues when you have outside entities or the legislature to come in and try to tell us how to do a business. And that is something that it keeps me up at night every day, because we need to make sure we get to pay the benefits and a fund continues to grow the way it has been.
I see Mr. Grable has sidled up to the podium. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that the point of this presentation is precisely aligned with Mr. Santos's point that we're presenting this information because climate and other scenarios, be it social scenarios, have the potential to have material economic consequences for the fund, risks and or opportunities. So we're doing this all in the context of the potential value creation and prevention of value destruction of the fund. So we're just widening the lens of the factors that we evaluate in order to provide the best portfolios for our members.
Yeah. Thank you for that. All right. Any other comments or questions? Thank you. That was a great presentation. And I just want to reiterate what Mr. Grable said. We have to be aware of what our risks are, and we have to continue to look at the portfolio through a lot of different lenses to understand where and how we may or may not be surprised. So thanks for the work, and we'll look forward to continued evolution over the years. Thank you, Zach and Scott. All right, moving on to the Responsible Contractor Policy Annual Report. Who will be leading this, Mr. Drazel?
Oh, okay.
Well, you're just on the...
My apologies.
Today is the Scott show.
Great. So thank you, Ms. Chair, once again. Report 8C, we can start on slide 3, please. This provides the board with an update of LACERA's implementation of the recently revised responsible contractor policy. By way of quick background, as shown on the timeline at the bottom, LACERA first adopted an RCP in 2002, so over 2 decades ago. The aim of that RCP was to safeguard and enhance performance. We just talked about safeguarding, enhancing performance. Really in LACERA's real estate separate accounts, by requiring separate account managers to select high-quality contractors who could demonstrate that they have a track record of legal compliance, stable labor relations, and strong safety records. So last year, the board refreshed and restated that RCP. The new policy now encourages the same responsible contracting principles that are commingled fund exposures, expands the RCP to all of real assets as that asset class has grown in recent years, and also harmonizes language in the RCP with principles and the investment beliefs that are laid out in the IPS that were revised in the interim since the first adoption of the RCP in 2002. So the report today is intended to provide trustees with observations and takeaways on the implementation of the new RCP to date. As Mike will go over, LACERA's separate account managers continue to report compliance with LACERA's RCP, which is positive. At our commingled fund exposures, we've continued to see more asset managers adopt and implement RCPs of their own, which the team is evaluating as part of upfront due diligence as we're expanding our exposure to commingled fund vehicles. A significant majority of the commingled fund managers now have RCP provisions, but as the report will highlight, the specifics of what those policies cover vary. And that to us underscores the importance of folding in the review of RCP provisions as we're underwriting new commingled fund opportunities and engaging with managers to recommend effective practices that are laid out in LACERA's RCP. So this review and engagement with managers remains dynamic. And as we go over this year's results, we also hope to report positive trend lines going forward as well. So with that said, I'll also just highlight that on slide 4, we refresh everyone's awareness of what the 5 key provisions of the RCP are. That includes encouraging fair wages and benefits so that contractors don't undercut each other by undermining employee health provisions, for example. Also includes an expectation for compliance with all local labor, state and federal laws, ensuring equal opportunity and non-discrimination in contracting opportunities, competitive bidding with adequate advance notice so that qualified contractors can be considered and take part in that bidding process, and also adherence to internationally recognized labor standards, including the freedom of association. So I'll turn it over to Mike to go over the recent review.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and trustees. If we can please go to slide 5. Thank you. So the left table shows how the policy applies to separate account managers where LACERA owns 50% or more of the equity. And separate account managers are required to comply with the terms and provisions in the RCP to all contracts valued over $100,000. For commingled funds, where LACERA does not have greater than 50% equity ownership or control of an investment fund, LACERA strongly encourages the GPs to have provisions and practices in place that are similar to LACERA's policy. As Scott mentioned, part of our underwriting process is to review the managers that have similar provisions in place and those that do not, and how we can assist them in implementing those. We can move to slide 6. This provides an overview of the evaluation process and staff's assessment. Staff shared the updated RCP to all separate account managers. We had discussions with each manager to see how they would implement the revised policy. And we continue to have dialogues with the managers on the implementation and their ongoing efforts. We're happy to report that 100% of our separate account managers are in compliance with our policy. All 5 separate account managers have provisions in place to implement the LACERA's policy. About $25 million was paid to 70 contractors with services over $100,000, and no formal complaints were filed during the fiscal year. Moving on to slide 7. This slide illustrates the number of contracts by services and the cost for those contracts. It demonstrates a wider span of different services. The majority of the contracts were in construction, repair and maintenance, janitorial services, and security services. Moving to slide 8. Similar to the separate account evaluation process, we shared our RCP with all GPs. We held discussions with GPs to review their RCP efforts, and we intend to continue to have those conversations to evaluate their efforts on that part. We assessed 17 commingled fund managers, and about 2/3 of them have voluntarily adopted RCPs that applies to LACERA's mandate.
Mike, I have a question on that. In that voluntary adoption, did they already have policies that simply aligned with ours and so adoption was easy, or did they actively make a change to their policies in order to align with our policies in that voluntary adoption? Did it just happen to be that they had a similar policy and so they said check?
The majority of them had already have a policy in place.
Okay.
So it doesn't
Didn't
it doesn't
require much
cover
effort.
all of our provisions. So we're working with them to part of our role is to influence them and assist them in developing a robust policy like ours. But most of them did have a policy in place.
Got it, thanks.
So we wanted to understand, what the provisions were in place. So our view is that the policies from our commingled fund managers are not all the same. They vary in terms of how robust they are or how extensive they are. 100% of those that have RCP policies.
You can go to slide
I'm sorry, go to slide 9. Expect minimum labor laws. Almost all have fair wages and benefits and living wage provisions that require competitive bidding. And about half of the GPs expect labor neutrality, and about half have anti-money laundering and anti-corruption provisions. Staff continues to have discussions with the managers during quarterly calls and while we attend LPAC meetings to help them make reasonable efforts in this area. We can move on to slide 10. This is just a summary. All of our separate account managers are in compliance. About 2/3 of our commingled funds have voluntarily adopted a policy. And staff continues assessing their provisions during underwriting. I'll now pass it over to Jim, who'll cover the next slide.
Do you want to ask the question now?
Yeah, please.
Mr. Kelly has a question.
Thank you. You talked about complaints and not receiving any, but how would someone know to complain and the complaint mechanisms?
So part of the process that we have in place is that each contractor has to affirm by signature by a senior level person that there are no complaints in place. And also our separate account managers have to provide an affirmation that covers that area. So that gives us some comfort that those two are covering those areas.
Okay, but how would the manager inform a contractor that the contractor can complain?
It is not written directly in our policy, but if there is a dispute, I believe contractors have the ability to do that.
Okay. So for example, at the county, I'm right outside or right inside the office of my former office, and I think this might actually be a requirement by the audit controller, is a big sign that says, have you observed any fraud in your interactions with the county at all? If so, call the fraud hotline. And those forms are pretty much plastered everywhere, I think, in county offices. And so it's good to hear that people haven't complained, but I would also want to know that they've been informed that they could complain if necessary, and then what the complaint mechanisms are. So I would just ask you to think about that. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
All right. If we could move on to the final slide, please. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and trustees. To conclude our discussion of the RCP, we have a slide illustrating the steps we have going forward on this program and policy. I'll highlight a few of those. One of them is, I think, what Mike just mentioned, that in reviewing this policy with managers over the past year, we believe understanding how fund managers are applying this policy will be beneficial as we do diligence in future funds. Next, we did a in-depth discussion with all of our fund managers on the real estate side in the past year. Similarly, we're rolling out this to include all of
the other part of real assets, which is infrastructure and natural resources. We intend to have similar discussions in the coming months with those managers about their own policies or lack thereof, and how they might incorporate some of the provisions that LACERA would like them to adopt. And then lastly, similar to today, staff intends to provide an annual report that reflects our assessments, not just of our separate accounts, the information that they're reporting, but also how our fund managers are moving to adopt provisions in our RCP. So that concludes my comments or our staff's comments, and we're happy to stand for any questions.
Okay, any last questions? All right, thank you for the presentation. Fantastic. All right, the rest of our presentations are for information only. Does anybody have any requests to pull any of those? Okay, great. Moving on to items for staff review.
Madam Chair, I just have a couple quick questions on the legal analysis.
Yes, legal analysis.
I can sidebar. I just wanted for information and education purposes. I wanted to. Is Barry here today?
No.
Okay. I'll table it and call him directly.
So there was one item.
Yes.
So I'm sorry. Let me grab this. So agendize for the JOG C, the discussion regarding county ordinance on salary limits for a future agenda item. So that's the only item we have.
Okay. Great. All right, let's go to good of the order.
Mr. Knox?
Good morning, great meeting. Again, I was just going to touch on the value of attending PPI. Really appreciated the opportunity. I'm fascinated by the discussions on energy and in particular what Japan was doing to kind of broaden their view on ways that they could go green and reduce their reliance on coal and such. Just a fascinating time seminar, the small group followed by the big group. Also enjoyed the discussions with my fellow trustees, so just wanted to share those thoughts and wish everybody a good day.
All right, thank you. Mr. Green? Yeah, David Green?
Oh, yes.
That one?
Thank you, Madam Chair, on a great meeting. And she walked out, but I was going to thank Linda as well for all the work that she does to make sure we're on the right track. I won't see you all till after Thanksgiving, right? So happy, safe Thanksgiving to you all.
Great, thank you. Mr. Santos?
Yes, thank you. Great meeting. Again, tremendous work by the staff. Appreciate it. I think for me, it's a great opportunity to see the fund mature in, like I've been saying, we can no longer continue to operate like we were $23 billion. We need to operate like we have $70 billion and get it ready to hit at some point in the future $100 billion. So it's the delegation of authority. I think it was forthcoming, and I'm happy that we did that today. I did also attend PPI as always. It's one of the premier organizations. The level of the speakers that they had there, as always, is tremendous. They always bring high level. Government officials, high-level individuals from the industry is tremendous, and I will encourage colleagues here on the board at your earliest opportunity to get involved with PPI. It's a really good organization. So with that, happy Thanksgiving for everyone. And I hope the conflict in the Middle East gets resolved somehow, because I'm really having nightmares about that situation there, but it is what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Mr. Jason Green?
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, thanks to staff and the board and the chair, and we're coming to close of my first year, and there's going to be some folks here that aren't going to be here, and I wanted to say thank you to your guys' help and input and mentorship and robust discussions and opinions, and it's observed, and we got one more month, one more meeting, and to staff, with all you guys do, yeah, I'll close with, we got Veterans Day observed on Friday, and Veterans is for the living and Memorial Day is for the dead. And, we're reminded constantly, right? It was Veterans Day was born out of the war to end all wars. But since that, who was it? Was it Orwell that said that in his book, or it was, don't quote me on that, but it wasn't the war to end all wars, and we're constantly reminded. And unfortunately, I think moving forward into the future, it is absolutely necessary that we're going to have people, men and women that are in that military to keep us safe, and we need to acknowledge them. And so,
I'm sorry. Thank you.
so when we're hanging out on Friday on the day off, I just tip a glass to them, and thanks for your service to anybody on the staff too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rue.
Thank you. And I appreciate being on the tail end of all the restructuring, and I really want to thank all the staff, all the consultants for all your hard work, but in particular to my board members, fellow trustees, especially those who are going off. I really want to thank you guys again, because everything works so well. I can't imagine that LACERA ever had a problem. And so I really thank you guys, because everything, knock on wood, of course, is working like clockwork. And there's very little to comment, because I know there's a lot of thought, a lot of effort, a lot of past experiences that went on to everything that we're discussing today. So I really appreciate it. Appreciate coming on when it's good. And of course, happy Veterans Day to all of our men and women who served, including my younger brother who served. I'll go and thank him. And of course, happy Thanksgiving to all.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Oh, I'm used to Mrs. Jones always going before me.
She left.
Virtually. Good afternoon from Palm Springs here at Sackers. I thought there'd be a few more trustees here than me from LACERA, but maybe I just wanted to avoid the traffic heading out that way. But on a couple of things, one, thankful to staff for a full and robust presentation, particularly around the delegation authority work, which I know is really hard, tedious work, but very necessary as we look to progress on this. So thanks to Makita and Scott and the team for the hard work on that particular initiative. Likewise, just want to acknowledge the immediate ancestors on the board that will be retiring or rolling off. Due to that, and so and just also just sets the right tone for stewardship, civic stewardship that we have for the not so new members, as I understand that I'm somewhere behind Keith Knox in seniority now, which still seems like amazing to me. But likewise have a stewardship collectively to continue that civic spirit and our fiduciary responsibility to the people who work so hard for the promised benefits that we have here. Similarly, also happy holidays, upcoming holidays for me as a girl dad of a basketball hooper. This is things get serious leading into the holidays. So on that piece. And then lastly, I had the opportunity to go to Las Vegas for our NC PERS. There was a trustee kind of only weekend. Imagine that, trustees in Las Vegas over a weekend, where we're there from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. But it was great to be in the room with 55 other trustees, from plans as small as 500 million to others as large as 100, 150 billion, just through the whole range of different steps, and then likewise could appreciate all the efforts that we've gone through, going from 23 billion to 70 billion, as Herman constantly reminds us how important that growth strategy trajectory has been. So that's it. I just miss being there and being able to feed off the energy and all the great work that's there. But look forward to continuing to bring things back to the Hive from these learning excursions as well. So happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. There was an awful lot of work that went into today's meeting, and the board didn't do it, the staff did, and our consultants. So thank you for that. There were some big issues that we discussed, and they're important. And then I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Rue, who had a fortune cookie at his desk, and I said, "Are you going to eat that fortune cookie?" He said, "No." So he gave it to me, and it says, "You are as intelligent as you are good-looking." Panda Express. So I'm keeping this, Mr. Rue. Thank you for sharing it, because it's so true. Thank you.
Only you would get that.
Thank you.
I just told everyone I had Panda Express.
So the fortune cookies from Panda Express.
Mr. Grable.
Thank you, everyone, for the discussion. I was handed that same fortune cookie last month. I just want to thank everyone for the discussion today. A couple points of clarification. Earlier, I said we would have the real estate numbers by the end of the meeting. The one-year numbers are down about 8%, but we've outperformed which is about 200 basis points better than the benchmark. So you don't want to celebrate losses, but it could have been worse potentially. Also, the crisis response plan is in the governing document library, so the board currently has access to that, as does the public. And I know this is something that trustees have asked about, and I believe it goes live tomorrow. So a big shout out to Linda and Jude, who have been working on it. Is a Board of Investments education library with various documents and presentations embedded in it, and that will be accessible through the portal tomorrow, I believe.
Oh yeah, it's through one meeting, so either tomorrow or Friday. We're just making sure that everything is captured.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
And Ms. Sanchez.
Well, I also went to PPI, and I will say that I have been to Tokyo kind of on a cycle of about every 10 years. And so it feels like it changes dramatically. But the program was extremely robust. And I think that it is just a testament to, you really shouldn't invest somewhere you have not seen. And it was incredible to see firsthand. And, the reform that they have done within the stock exchange and just generally seeing Japan start to rethink how it approaches its own growth was fabulous. So I would, again, as Mr. Santos said, strongly recommend participation in PPI programs. And then I would be remiss if I did not give a hearty thanks to the very hard work that staff did and the really strong engagement that we had from the board across, 6 different meetings that we had an opportunity to opine and discuss and grapple and work through. I think all of that showed in the really tremendous work that that was brought here today. So it is obviously a group effort, and it will continue to be a group effort. And I love that we are moving towards our learning libraries, our resource libraries, our disaster plan and tabletop exercises. And I think we need to move that into governance. And as an organization, it just feels every day like we are moving in the right direction. And it is an effort by everyone. And I really appreciate that. So with that, I will take a we would do adjourn
Can you
yet.
make an announcement?
Yeah, so with that, I'll make an announcement. As we go into executive session, we're going to go straight into executive session because we're going to lose a few people. So I want to make sure we cover as much as possible before we do that. We are not going to have item 1, which is the real assets, item A1, which is the real assets and earning manager program. That's been postponed to next month. So we will just be discussing the real estate portfolio.
So that's an FYI.
That's an FYI.
So the next item is the potential threat.
Yes.
So we need to clear the room for that one item.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and clear the room for the potential threat item. And with that, let's give, how many, 5 minutes to change over?
Yeah, 5 minutes is
Let's
fine.
give 5 minutes to change over and clear the room. And thank you, everyone.
Hey, Ms. Chair, it's H.G. Wells. You can quote that.
H.G. Wells,
Yes,
got
thank
it. Okay. You're quoted. You're quoted.